first tale is entitled Midnight in Kentucky. When you're low on gas on a lonely highway, a rest stop can be a welcome sight, unless the place makes it clear that you're anything but welcome there. This story was written by Joshua Starbringer and is read by Isla Shanuel.
There wasn't a soul on this parkway, not even a semi-driver. Both sides of the older highway were surrounded by steep shoulders and lined with tall deciduous trees, which had shed their leaves by this time of year and only allowed their skeletal remains to be left behind, reaching into the cold black sky lined with stars. There was no moon, so if I peered into the window long enough, I could make out the Milky Way in the southern sky. There was absolutely nothing else on the highway, save for an exit every 20 miles to some state highway that led to nowhere, or the occasional rusted sign that exhibited the change of counties or labeled the small creek they'd tried to call a river. I had driven about 2 hours, and I was only about 20 minutes from the interstate, which was quite a bit busier than the dead parkway I was driving on. The Honda was low on gas, and I knew there was a gas station just off the highway. It was a weird place for a gas station, combined with some sort of food place for a rest stop of sorts, between the imposing lines of traffic right before the parkway ended at the interstate. Open 24 hours, always a stop on field trips from schools that were going somewhere. Been there all my life. I pulled off to the left ramp leading to the station. I thought it odd that I could see no lights. When I pulled up, the station was totally dark, like it was closed, but not abandoned. There were no truck trailers under the station roofing, no semis in the lot, no cars pumping gas, but I pulled up anyway, hoping the pumps were still on and took credit even if they weren't lit. The pump had no power to it. Its digital screens were dark, backlighting off, and plastic bags were over the pump handles, like the place was out of order. Great, I thought. They must be closed for repair or renovation or something, and here I was with about a gallon left in the tank and 40 miles from the nearest gas station in either direction. I pulled out my old Nokia cell phone. Damn Sprint. The Kentucky coverage while I was in college was atrocious, and I didn't have any bars, even if I turned roaming on. I turned the car off and decided to wander around the lot for a signal, a sleeping trucker, or a powered pump. It was a fairly large station, with dozens of both gas and diesel pumps and parking spaces for cars and trucks for the station, but my phone didn't give me any luck. Neither did any light. There was absolutely nothing there. Except for a black figure that just darted from the tree line on the freeway across the opposing lanes of traffic and behind the station. I did a double take, thinking I must have seen shadows from a car's headlights or some animal, but I knew in the back of my mind that even shadows wouldn't move that fast, or have legs that could run on twos. I watched the station for several moments, but I didn't see anything else. I wandered back towards my car, still looking at my phone. No signal. Where the fuck did my car go? I knew I'd left it by pump number 1, but there was nothing there. Not even an oil stain. I heard a sound in the silence of the station that sounded like something heavy creaking on a suspension system, like a car that had just been lowered from a lift. I spun around, and there was my car, across the lot, at pump 16. And the headlights were on, and the driver's door was open. I could hear the dinging from across the lot. It was so quiet. I stopped. I must have been dreaming. I must have parked at number 16, since I was coming from the west instead of the east. That must have been it. I started back towards my car, and the driver's door shut with a slam. Luckily, it didn't lock, but it made my heart jump in my chest. I was getting a little nervous now, wondering if somebody else was here, playing some kind of sick joke. I eyed my car with some caution, but kept walking towards it. A black shadow ripped across the lot and leaped from the car into the back of the lot like a bounding deer, but I saw it dead on. It was human-shaped, with no discernible features, but even in the darkness of the unlit station, it was darker. I bolted for my car and locked the doors. There must have not been much gas left in the tank because I couldn't start the car at first. Goddamn horror movie cliche. But then I realized why I wouldn't start. The car was in drive, not park. and for an instant a huge wave of relief came over me as I shifted it into park and successfully started the engine. But horror gripped me like a cold vice when I realized I had left the car in park to begin with. Whatever was here, I was having no more of it. I threw the car into drive and spun the poor Honda around, heading back onto the quiet parkway. I happened to notice the time, 12 a.m. Midnight. I came down the ramp and started passing wrong way and do not enter signs. I realized I'd started going down the wrong way ramps onto the parkway. Slammed on the brakes, backed up to the shoulder, and swung around towards the station, having to pass it to go back the way I wanted. It was still dark as ever, though there was a sense of foreboding as I passed it. I could have sworn I saw a pair of yellow, coyote-like eyes peering at me from inside the station, lit up by the headlights of my car like cat's eyes on the shoulder of the road at night. There was something black around them, black around those eyes. I heard a slow breathing start in my car, a breathing that was not my own. Damn it, it was coming from the back seat. I was more angry than scared. At least I caught sight of those yellow eyes in my rear. Shrouded in darkness, face of shadow. I nearly jumped out of my seat and swerved in the on-ramp going back down the parkway. Fuck it, I thought. If I run out of gas, at least I'll be on the interstate. That's what I thought until I got onto the parkway and the steering wheel started turning under its own power towards the steep shoulder. I instinctively pulled the wheel back and turned the car back towards the freeway lane. After a second or so, it clicked that something was trying to control the car and force me off the highway. I hit the brakes and brought the car to a screeching halt on the shoulder. I threw the car in neutral, which was good, because the fucking engine began to rev off its own power and as though the accelerator was stuck, which would have thrown me into the trees. I finally managed to stop the car, but left it running. All I could hear was the car's engine. I sat a moment trying to get my bearings and breath. When I looked back up, the car was surrounded by shrouded black figures, looking at me like they were looking down into a casket at a funeral, again with no features. I didn't hesitate this time. I threw the car back into drive and floored it, getting the Honda towards 90 miles per hour on that dark parkway. At least I'd attract police attention if anyone was out here. No one ever came after me, and the car finally started sputtering and running on fumes just as I entered the interstate, where every few minutes at least a semi-truck was driving by. I got one of them to call the police for me, and a state trooper showed up about a half hour later with a gallon of gas. I thanked him profusely and asked about the rest stop back on the parkway, if he knew why it was closed. He looked suspiciously at me and scratched his head, looking at me with his flashlight to see if I was on something. Ma'am, I was just there a half hour ago, and it was open, like it has been for the last 20 years. I think you'd best head home for the night. I heeded his advice.
Our second tale is entitled The Sound. Modern electronics can mask unwanted sounds, but some sounds can be warnings that you should definitely heed. This story was written by April Edgreen and is read by Gilles Duarte.
It was such a normal night. Nothing had happened to prime me for what was about to occur. I've lived in my apartment for over a year and nothing even remotely scary has happened. Nothing even remotely scary has happened to me ever. No offense, but when I read ghost stories, I don't believe them. However, after this event, I think I'll be changing that preconceived notion. I was doing what I usually do on a Tuesday night. I was online, some Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, and the little MMOs. I had a fan going in the living room because my apartment gets really hot for some reason. I live on the first floor and don't run the heater for the most part. I kept hearing a weird sound within the white noise of the fan. Whenever I would stop what I was doing to listen, I wouldn't hear it. It was a small, low sound that repeated itself 3 times before it would stop for a minute or two. I figured there was something in the fan motor or maybe emanating from a neighbor's apartment. Finally, I got up to get some water and switched the fan off to see if it was a fan itself. I waited, but the apartment was still. I almost gave up and turned the fan back on when I heard it. The chill that ran through me is indescribable. What I heard was a small, low growl. It repeated 3 times and then in a weird breathing sound, as if the thing was having trouble drawing breath. It did this twice, then stopped. I just stood there. I didn't know what to do. I was so afraid to move, so afraid that it would get me. The silence was almost as bad as the sound itself, and I nervously cleared my throat. The sound started again, and I jumped. It was coming from my bedroom, which was of course dark, and at the end of the dark hallway. I stared in that direction but was caught in the fear of actually seeing something. It sounded human and the frequency was weird and erratic. I almost started to think it was a recording, but I was not about to go investigate. I grabbed my cell phone out of my pocket to call my friend and heard a giggle. A little girl's giggle, then nothing. I think I stood there for half an hour before I could move. I slid open my phone to call when I heard the growl again. This time, it was much lower, louder, and longer. I think I whispered something like, "No," before the lights went out. I have never been in such a state of fight or flight before. My whole body was tingling and tense. Every hair was standing up and I was afraid my heart was going to stop. I shakily pressed a button on my phone to make the display light up so I could see where I was going. I had to get to my door so I could get as far away from here as possible. To say I was terrified was an understatement. I turned my phone to point at the ground in front of me, and there was a face caught in the glow of my display. It was a female with black eyes, long hair, and a smile with way too many teeth. I turned and ran to where I thought my door was, searching in the dark for the doorknob. I could hear a weird shuffling behind me and again the small growl. It was getting closer and I searched more frantically. My hand wrapped around the doorknob and I pulled it open just as I felt a tug on my pant leg. I was in the hallway and outside to my car before the door to my apartment closed. I turned on my car and was backing up before I caught a glimpse of the face in a very high part of my window. I never went back. I moved in with my friend and found another apartment. My friends got all my stuff out only when it was light. They never heard the story, but apparently, my face was enough.
Our third tale is entitled The Hidden Chamber. Landscaping around the yard can be a tedious task, but when you unearth a hidden secret from the past, you'd best be prepared to stop digging. This story was written by Justin Williams and is read by Max Glaspie.
A month ago, I decided to get started on my summer project of building a stone patio in my backyard. I live in a row home within a city, so my yard isn't large. It measures somewhere around 20 by 30 feet. Because of the relatively small size, I thought the initial clearing work would be quick, but I had 2 problems. The first one I was already aware of, and that was that the previous owners must have been rip-roaring drunk when landscaping, as unruly bushes, sprawling trees, and random plants were placed almost arbitrarily throughout the yard. The second problem was that the ground was absolutely rife with bricks. I couldn't take a shovelful of dirt without the frustrating and tiresome clank of metal striking one. It was exasperating and time-consuming, and the pile of bricks I unearthed grew quickly. After digging out the slight incline through the back of my yard, I moved towards the already level front portion. There I discovered was a rusted iron pipe rising out of the ground. I hadn't noticed it initially because it had been behind a bunch of plants and tucked beside a fence post. There was about a foot of post sticking out of the ground, and there was no obvious reason for its existence. I suppose it was ventilation, but I wasn't sure for what it would be used. My second surprise discovery was a long stone block that ran about a half-foot below the dirt surface along the length of my yard. When I first struck it, I had assumed it was just more brick, but I couldn't find an edge. After more digging, I ended up uncovering what appeared to be a foundational or structural slab that was about 2 feet wide and 8 feet long. After trying to dig down and underneath it, I ran into another hard surface that was either more brick or another stone. It was much deeper than I needed to be and wanted to move forward with the project, so I reluctantly filled the gap back in and moved on. After moving to the very front edge of the yard, I again ran into a hard surface. The clang of my shovel head was different this time and sounded more like metal on metal. My curiosity was very much piqued at this point, and I hurriedly set to digging around to uncover what I had found. When I had reached the edges of the metal surface, I took a step back at the 3x3 square I had uncovered and gasped. I had found a hatch. I got excited and started thinking through the possibilities. My house is very old, around 145 years, and I had no reason to think whatever I had found wasn't built at the same time. It only took a few seconds to find the small metal ring on the rusted trapdoor, so I stopped thinking, dropped my shovel, and lifted the handle and pulled. No movement. After 15 minutes of tugging, wiggling, and greasing the dark hinges with WD-40, the door creaked open and I fell over on my rear from the sudden imbalance. I scrambled up and tried again, and the hatch opened fairly easily on the next pull. I gently swung it fully opened and laid it back, revealing wooden steps descending into a pit that opened towards the larger part of the yard. Light was fading outside and I couldn't see much, but I was fully in explorer mode at this point and wanted to at least take a few steps into the pit before going inside to get a flashlight. I tested the first step, and although it creaked and groaned, it seemed capable of bearing the weight. I stepped down into the hole and slowly and steadily climbed down 4 steps before making it down to a dirt floor. The light seemed better once I was down there, and I could see back into the room for around 8 or 10 feet. I couldn't see a back wall, but I could see what looked like a wooden workbench tucked off to the right side near the back of the visible area. Outside of that, I saw only darkness. I figured I would check out the bench and then go back upstairs to tell my girlfriend about the room and grab the flashlight. The place smelled damp, earthy, and stale, and the combined scents almost overwhelmed my other senses as I moved towards the bench. Just as I neared it, I heard a creak from behind me, and my stomach dropped as I felt a sudden dread. I started to spin back towards the opening when the slow, creaking sound suddenly sped up, echoing throughout the chamber. I turned just in time to see the sliver of daylight shrinking quickly and the door slamming shut with a loud, resonating boom. I was all alone in total and complete darkness. I instantly lost my bearings in the absolute blackness that surrounded me. I was terrified about who had shut the door, and even more scared about the ridiculous possibility that something was in the hole with me. In an attempt to reorient myself, I tried to find the bench that I was so close to, but all I could feel as I groped around was the cold air. After a few moments, I stopped and crouched down, trying to steady my breathing and build a plan. Deprived of light, I was horrified that I would hear something that I wouldn't be able to identify. Luckily, it stayed silent. After a minute or so, my breathing had almost returned to normal, and I was about to try to find a wall when I saw a faint light. I hoped that my eyes were adjusting and I was seeing some slight light through a hole in the stone ceiling, perhaps where I had been digging earlier. Then the light got brighter. I'd like to say that I stayed rational and continued to assume that the light was somehow natural, but as its intensity increased, so did the feeling of dread deep in my stomach. My first reaction was to move away from it, and I started to back away, but I couldn't seem to add any distance between myself and the light. It was at least 30 feet away when I started, and it stayed right there no matter how far I walked. My yard wasn't even big enough to bear a room that big, unless it had covered several neighbors' yards, and that seemed unlikely. Maybe I was just seeing things differently in the darkness. I felt a bit calmer the more I looked. Even though I couldn't identify the source, it didn't illuminate anything sinister. I couldn't move away from it, and I was getting desperate. I wanted out. I was going to move towards it, at least a little closer. Even though I was scared, I thought perhaps I could find a hole out that I could open up and slip through. I wasn't even sure I could move towards it, or if it would just stay the same distance away again, but I started walking. I crept along the length of the hole, and the light stayed bright, and I seemed to be slowly nearing it. The source seemed to be something on the ground, but I couldn't quite see what it was, although I was sure at that point that I was in fact moving closer with each step. Once I had reached to about 10 feet from the light, I could see that it was a lantern sitting on the ground. Everything felt so surreal at this point, and I remember not feeling particularly scared, kind of like it was a dream and there were no actual consequences. Looking back, I have no idea where that control, or lack of it, came from, and I had no idea why I didn't just try to go the other way again. As I walked towards the lantern in this strange state, I saw something that made the dread suddenly come back worse than ever. In the blink of an eye, I could see 5 children sitting in a circle around the lantern. They sat towards the light, 4 young girls and a boy sitting almost alone on the right. They appeared to all be around the same age, I guess maybe 10 or 12. They wore dark clothes that were dirty and worn, and their faces looked tired and muted. In a move I will never be able to explain, I called out to them, sounding out a shaky hello. There was no response at all, either verbally or physically. I was still slowly walking and was within 5 feet of them at this point. I tried again to call out to them, but they continued to sit silently, looking towards the lantern. I took one more step, and one girl, the one facing me from the opposite side of the circle, looked up and noticed me. I stopped. Her face was distorted in fear. She gurgled out a low note in a suppressed reaction, and it was enough for the other girls to take notice of me as well. As I looked around the circle, I could see the outright terror in each of their eyes. Until I reached the boy. He was the only one not looking at me, but instead still sat Indian style, playing with something in his hands. His face was different than the girls'. It was painted in the unmistakable emotion of pure anger. The girls got up and moved back, never turning away from me. They moved away slowly, pushing against the back wall that was suddenly visible. The boy never rose. As I looked at the girls, I suddenly realized something that made my breath catch. As I looked at their eyes, I realized they were not looking at me. They were looking at something behind me. I swung around and felt a complete loss of control. A man stood there at the workbench, a soft glow illuminating his back as he worked on something in front of him. I stared, unsure of my next move. I tried to catch a glimpse of what he was working on at the bench, but I couldn't quite see in the dim light. Then he calmly raised his hands, and I saw the slight light from the lantern catch the dull blade of a butcher knife. I could hear him humming a soft tune as he worked. I swung quickly back around and the girls were gone, but the boy still sat angrily, playing with whatever was in his hands. As I stared, his face finally rose and he looked directly at me. Not behind me this time, not beyond me, but directly into my eyes. I will never forget the vitriol I saw in his face. As I stared, unable to remove my eyes from his, I saw a blur in my peripheral. In a flash, I realized it was the man marching quickly past me. Before I could react, he grabbed the kid roughly by one arm and jerked him partially to his feet. I took a step towards them, protective nature of a human being kicking in, even though I knew this couldn't be real. But before I could even get close, the man had raised the knife to the boy's throat, the kid's furious eyes never losing contact with mine. As the knife began its work, they both faded away along with the lantern. I was left alone again in the pure dark. Badly shaken and scared, I turned and moved in the direction I thought I had come from. I wanted to get out before they came back, but I wasn't even sure I was in the same room I had started in. Then, out of the still black, came a sound. It was faint, but as it repeated, I realized it was a voice calling my name. I couldn't handle it anymore. I just wanted out. To my great relief, I realized it was my girlfriend. She was outside. I ran towards the sound. I screamed, I hollered, I begged. I was on the verge of breaking when she responded. She could hear me. With a quivering voice, I shouted instructions for finding the door and opening it, glancing over my shoulder all the while. All I saw was darkness. After what felt like an eternity, I could hear the metal clank of the door as she located it and she began pulling. It was too heavy for her to lift on her own, but she managed to crack it open enough to let in a little light for a moment before it dropped back down with a clang. It was enough. I clawed around until I found the stairs, then clambered up and began shoving above me, yelling for my girlfriend to get out of the way. I felt like I could have lifted a truck to get out of that room. After a moment, I burst out into the overwhelming light that bled into my eyes. Collapsing onto the dirt outside, I laid there for a few minutes, breathing heavily and deeply before I could start to tell my story to my disbelieving girlfriend. This happened a few weeks ago. I've scoured the internet for reports of missing children or murders in my neighborhood, but haven't found anything that would make any sense. I've talked to my neighbors and everyone else I know about it, but no one has had anything to offer. I don't think they believe me. My girlfriend seems sick of hearing about it. She's begged me to just cover up the door. I can't. I have an overwhelming desire to go back in. Every day, I go back out and stand at the entrance, but going back in just hadn't felt right. Today, I feel different. Ready. I decided I was going to take the door from the hinges and move it aside before going back in, but I've changed my mind. I'm going to leave it on. I need to find out what happened down in the hole.
Our final tale is entitled Georgie's. An invitation to a neighborhood pub might seem friendly until you realize the pub and its patrons are not very hospitable. This story was written by Christopher McTaggart and is read by Christina Schultz.
There used to be a bar called Georgie's across the street from my office that had been closed and apparently just left to rot well before I started working here, and as such I had never seen the inside of it. All that I knew about it was what I could gather walking past the front windows every morning as I got off the bus. There were signs and flyers taped to the windows much like any bar. Course drafts were 50 cents on Tuesdays. Wednesday night was ladies' night, and they required ID from all patrons. Behind the hastily taped up signs, the windows were all covered in aging brown butcher paper, like many similar boarded up establishments, so the signs truly were the depth of my knowledge. I work really late hours pretty regularly. My company analyzes data for large institutions, and most of our clients require guarantees and agreements in place to turn around any work we receive in 48 hours or less. My part of this is the last step in a rather complicated, if admittedly boring process, and as such my schedule is generally the most affected by any kinks in the system. As a result of my fucked up work schedule, I found myself running into the building custodian doing his nightly rounds with a certain bit of regularity. He'd come in somewhere around 7 to 8 p.m. every night, mutter to himself, pull bags out of all the trash baskets around me, tie them off, leave them in the hall by the doors, and go about his routine. It was pretty obvious looking at him that he had a few years under his belt, as nobody's ever accused anybody who spent their days mired in hard labor and poor health decisions of having a deceptively youthful appearance, if you know what I'm saying. After a few nights of having him and I be the only two in the building, he finished off his routine by telling me that I should stop into Georgie's some night. Georgie's. The abandoned bar across the street. Now, I don't want to come off as a dick or anything, but my first thought was that the custodian was retarded in some variety and that he didn't really know what he was talking about. With little faith in the custodian's mental abilities, I sort of half-heartedly told him that I was reasonably certain that the bar in question had been closed for a while, and that I had never even seen it open since I started working in that building years prior. The custodian seemed a bit put off by this and told me that one of his friends owned the building and that he had been trying to clean it out at night by inviting people to come drink the leftover booze for free. I have to admit that I was sort of put off by the idea of drinking years-old liquor in a presumably dilapidated and abandoned bar, so I politely brushed off the idea. Besides, I sensed that there was just something off about a story like that. Something that just didn't add up about an owner of an abandoned bar cleaning up his property by giving away liquor of questionable origin instead of throwing it away. But once again, I assumed that there might also just be something off about the custodian himself in the form of a mental disability, so I ignored it and moved on. I went back to work and didn't think any more of it. It was about this same time that I noticed a man who would get on the bus at my stop when I went home roughly every night. At first I hardly paid attention to him because seeing regular people at a bus stop isn't exactly out of the ordinary. After a week of seeing him though, it occurred to me that it was a bit odd to see the same person at my bus stop with any frequency, given the fact that my schedule follows no pattern. I might leave at 7 p.m. today and 12:30 a.m. tomorrow and something completely different next week. I stewed on this for a bit, but decided not to dwell on it too much, since, as my father always told me, you only notice coincidences because they are oddly coincidental. This series of coincidences did bring my attention to this man though, and I couldn't help but notice that he was old and more than a bit harsh looking. His eyes were sunken in, and his skin had the kind of pallor that generally accompanies people you don't want to associate with. There was just something inexplicably unsettling about him, but he was quiet and kept to himself, so I just let it pass. The custodian began asking me almost nightly about stopping into Georgie's for a drink, and I politely shrugged him off every time. My personal desire for aging liquor had sadly not grown since the last time he asked me. His insistence grew firmer every day, but there was a slight hesitation in his responses to my refusal, as if he was straining himself to keep his tone and demeanor reasonable. One morning, I woke up at my apartment to catch the bus, and I found the decrepit old man, who I usually see in the evenings waiting for a bus out of town, sitting at the corner of my street, not 100 feet away from my apartment building, waiting to catch the same bus as me, going into town. While this did creep me out a little, I will admit, I tried to rationalize it to myself with my usual mantra about coincidences and all of that. The bus eventually came and we both got on without saying a word. I lost myself in thought, as I usually do on buses, thinking about my schedule for the day, clients who need handled, and all of the other mindless shit I wander off to while waiting for the bus to get into town. Today, however, my pleasant daydream cloud was hastily burst when I absent-mindedly caught a glance of the old man's reflection in the bus window. He was staring at me from behind, head slightly crooked forward, eyes dead front, teeth just visible through a barely parted scowl, staring at me. I was a bit unnerved by this, but didn't want to make a scene, nor did I really know what I would do if I wanted to make a scene. He hadn't actually done anything other than sit on the bus, and for all I know, he was also just lost in thought. Perhaps he was just staring off into space, and I happened to be in the path between his eyes and the nothing he was staring off into. I wasn't about to make any assumptions. Eventually we made it into town, and we both got off the bus, continuing our habit of not saying a word to each other. I went through the rest of my day as if everything was normal. I left the office at 9:20 p.m. and the old man was waiting at the bus stop. Neither of us spoke to each other as usual, and eventually the bus came to pick the two of us up. As the bus was coming, I made the realization that every time we had gotten on the bus together, we always line up in such a manner that I get on before him. I had not been consciously arranging for this to happen, and while briefly considering it, I was certain that this happened whether it was just us or if it was a group of people waiting. The bus came to a stop and opened the doors. I immediately recognized that the old man was intentionally moving slower than I was so that he would end up on the bus after I did. I generally always sat toward the front, so my best guess is that he was trying to position himself to sit behind me, to watch me. As I approached the doors to the bus, I quickly fumbled my wallet out of my pocket and intentionally dropped it under the front tire closest to me. I feigned an apology to the driver and said I would just be 1 minute if she could be so patient. The old man first tried to assist, presumably so he could maintain his ruse, but I sternly told him that I was capable of handling this by myself. This prompted the bus driver, thankfully, to ask the old man if he was getting on or not, to which he relented and boarded. I picked up my wallet and stepped onto the bus. I apologized once again to the driver and walked towards the seats. The old man had taken the very front seat, and so I went a few rows back on the opposite side. I looked in the mirror at the front of the bus and saw it. He was staring at me in the mirror. I met his eyes dead on, and we stared at each other for a good 5 minutes as the bus began driving. I began sweating profusely as I had realized that my suspicions of the old man were most probably in the ballpark of truth, and that none of the coincidences I had noticed lately were actually coincidences. After about 10 minutes, he finally broke his gaze and turned around. He looked me straight on and in an angry tone asked me a question. "Why don't you ever go to Georgie's?" Spooked, I shrugged my shoulders. I had no idea how else to react to this. We were still inside city limits, so I yelled to the bus driver to let me off at the next stop. She obliged, and I stood up to get off, my mind set on catching a taxi to any random hotel far away from my house or office. I didn't want to see anybody familiar that night or the next morning. I wanted the coincidences to give me a break. As I walked past the old man to get off the bus, he hissed at me, "You would have liked it." I stayed quiet and hurried off the bus. The old man stayed on the bus as it started moving again, finally granting me peace and quiet. I caught the first cab I could hail, stopped at a gas station for my first pack of cigarettes in 3 years, and then continued on to a hotel on the other side of town. Specifically, I went to one of those nice hotels with proper security where you can't even get into the elevators without a key. I stayed in that hotel for 3 days, not leaving my room, living off of room service, calling off of work each day. I was at wit's end, and I was sure I had lost my mental faculties at that point, as nothing seemed to make sense. Eventually I checked out of the hotel at midday and took a cab to my office. I was relieved to find no old man waiting outside the hotel. outside my office, or anywhere. Perhaps he had finally moved on. When I found my boss, he asked me where I had been, and I made up some bullshit about a stomach flu. I figured that if I was going crazy, I didn't need to advertise it just yet. He told me that they were running behind schedule because of my absence and that I needed to jump back in. He started bitching at me about my work responsibilities, and I was pretty much tuning him out at that point, until he got to the last point he was trying to address. "Stop leaving your fucking garbage bags in the hall every night too, will you?" I told him that it was the custodian who did that every night, obviously, as I had no interest in staying late to clean the office. My boss gave me a weird look and told me there was no custodian, no janitor, no cleaning staff, and that the bags were only ever found in the hall closest to where I work. It was obvious that it was my garbage, and he wanted me to just knock it off and move on. I restated my position about the custodian that I had nightly conversations with, and my boss's weird look instantly became more troubled. It took the police 23 minutes to arrive at the office. I told the police everything: the janitor, the old man, Georgie's, all of it. Within hours, the neighborhood was flooded with cops, and they eventually received the authorization and manpower to break down the door into Georgie's. As the cops who bore first-hand witness told the story to reporters, the smell of death was overpowering as the glass door shattered. The scene they walked into was both macabre and surreal. There were 4 bodies crudely stitched together from the parts of other bodies, as if somebody took 4 sets of heads, 4 sets of legs, 4 sets of arms, and 4 torsos, and mixed them up into random configurations. The set, however, was missing pieces. One body had no arms, one body had no legs, one body had no head, and finally there was simply a pile of pieces with no torso to attach to. Macabre, surreal, and fortunately incomplete.
Tale is entitled You Never Smile. The disciplined routine of a military academy is not easy to disrupt until a dark presence shows it's not there to follow orders. This tale was written by Thomas Burr and is read by Max Glaspie.
It all started when I was 20 years old, living in suburban North Carolina. I was an officer in my ROTC unit and got offered the chance to participate as a cadre at a summer leadership class for high school students at the Citadel Military Academy. Of course, trying to prove myself to the colonel, I obliged and took the job. We packed up all of our things, took a truck-trailer combo down to the academy, and began to move in. That's when it started getting strange for me. I was in my room around 2 a.m. in my barracks when I heard footsteps outside. I knew I was the only one on that floor and looked at my doorway, only to see the light from the opposite room disappear. Confused and thinking that someone had gotten the wrong assignment, I decided to go see who was there, forgetting about the footsteps. Knocking on the door, I heard nothing. No one was in the room, or no one was answering. Quickly, I retreated back to my bunk, grabbed my moonbeam and my master key to unlock the door. Upon unlocking it, I swung the door open hard. No one was there. Only 2 dusty bunks, a pair of closets, and a pair of desks for the cadets to use for studies. Not being one to believe in ghosts and usually being able to trust my senses, I shrugged it off, thinking that fatigue was catching up with me. I walked back to my room, only to find that my door was wide open and my bunk unmade, sheets folded in the corner of my room. Again, footsteps. The hairs on my neck began to stand up, and I felt a malevolent presence nearby. Like any self-preserving person would do, I decided not to run and face what moved my things around my barracks. Turning and shining my moonbeam out the door, it looked like a man was standing across the balcony in front of the room I had just checked. Just the shape of a man, with no defining features. I called out to him, asking why he was out past curfew. He smiled. I'll never forget what it looked like. I hate to use references, but it's impossible to explain exactly what it looked like. It's like the split-faced woman, with the smile stretching ear to ear, and then beyond that. He had crooked, pointed teeth. I assumed it was a he because of the lack of curves you would find in a woman. He kept smiling at me for what seemed like hours. Just a sinister, twisted smile that made me want to shit my pants. Suddenly, I blinked and he was gone from the balcony. I quickly barricaded myself in my room and began to look for my cell phone to call the colonel and let him know that someone was on the grounds. The lights died. All that I could see was that smile, grinning at me from the corner of my room. I wanted to scream, to run, but I felt rooted to the spot. It got larger and larger until it seemed he was right in front of me, staring down and smiling.
Such a brave young man, willing to look upon someone that everyone else fears.
I finally found the will to speak, and all I could sputter was, "Who are you?" His smile grew larger and larger.
I'm just a visitor, here with a friend. You'll know him when you see him.
His head snapped back, like he was called from afar, and he disappeared from the room. I was shaken, and all that came to mind was sleep. I awoke the next morning with no recollection of the night before's conversation, and began my morning duties of waking cadets, getting everyone out of their rooms, and making sure they all got to the chow hall on time. Everything went normally for a few days, until one morning, while doing a head count, I found that one person was missing, from the room directly across from mine. Going up to berate the cadet and run him downstairs, I pounded on the door to awaken him. No answer. We'll call him Gretch, for preserving his memory.
Gretch, you have 5 fucking seconds to get on the quad before I come in there and stomp your ass down there from the 5th story.
Again, no answer. Usually that would send cadets scrambling for their gear, trying not to face the wrath of an upset instructor. Stomping back to my room, I grabbed my keys and went to unlock his door. That smile. That smile. For some reason, that was all I could think about as I made my way back.
I'm coming in, Gretch, and your ass is mine.
Kicking open the door, hoping to scare the cadet, I found that I was the one who was knocked flat on the floor. Hanging from a bedpost by his shoelaces, with a metal bar laying at his feet, was Gretch, his cheeks torn from ear to ear in a twisted smile. A voice suddenly filled my head, filled me with fear.
I told you I was here with a friend. You never smile enough. We can change that.
Our next tale is entitled, My Friend's Mother. When times are tough at home, a friend's family can offer support and comfort. But it can be rather uncomfortable if mom isn't quite herself. This tale was written by Eric Hessman and is read by David Cummings. Back in school, I had a good friend named Ryan. And, well, he was my only friend. After school, we always went to his house to hang out. His house sat almost in the middle of a big grazing field, which mostly worked in our advantage as it gave us a lot of room for playing outside. Since the house was in the middle of the field, you would have to follow a long driveway to get there. It was around 8 p.m., and a huge fight broke out between my parents and me. I was frustrated and couldn't stand it any longer, so I called Ryan's house as I needed to break away from this mess. He picked up the phone and was surprised hearing from me at such a late hour. We were kids back then. But after hearing my story, he said I could come over, although he said he was going to be away at football practice until 9, so I would have to wait for him. I agreed. A mistake. It was night, and it was dark. I didn't mind the dark, but I never liked the road that led to his house. Its wavy pattern would sometimes make me sick, especially if I was traveling in a car. But now that was not the case. I was on my bike. The disturbing part of this story will not happen on this road, though. Parking my bike by the side of their empty garage, I walked up their front porch and, reaching the door, rang the bell. The door opened almost as soon as my finger let go of the button, giving me a jump. There was no wait. It literally opened up almost instantaneously. It was his mother. I always liked his mother. She was kind, sweet, and always offered her support whenever I felt down. But I could tell something was wrong with her. Her usually bright eyes seemed darker. Her hair was not neatly tied in a bun behind her head. It fell upon her shoulders. Before I had the chance to examine her further, something much more unsettling caught my eye. She was smiling. She did not greet me or start talking, just kept smiling and stared right at me. Feeling very uncomfortable, I asked if everything was all right. "Come inside and have some tea with me," was her answer. Before I had the chance to answer, she went back into the house. It was then that I noticed that she was wearing her bathroom robe. Having neither the disrespect to decline her offer nor the guts to stay outside in the night, I entered the home and closed the door behind me. Heading towards the kitchen, I could hear her humming a strange tune. The moment I entered, she stopped humming and an overwhelming silence took over. Without waiting for a conversation to start, I took a seat at the kitchen table. She was standing in front of me, with her back turned in my direction. I tried not to look at her and started awkwardly looking around the room until the tea was ready. I was thinking, Ryan's mom would always seem warm and loving and eager to talk about anything concerning my school, family life, and anything else. Now she was just silent, saying nothing. I spent the next 5 minutes in this deep thought. And then it occurred to me. She hadn't moved at all during the whole time I was in the kitchen. With her back towards me, I could see that her hands were hanging down her shoulders. Her head was tilted to the left. Thinking something was wrong, I stood from the chair and approached her from behind. Making an awful lot of noise while doing so, she did not move a single bit. Carefully, I approached her from the right side to look at her face to see if she was all right. The following sight still haunts me to this very day. Her eyes were wide open, and she was smiling. Being as unsettled as I was, I decided it'd be best to get back home. "I think I'd better be off now. I have a lot of schoolwork for tomorrow," I lied, and receiving no answer in return, I headed towards the front door and stepped outside onto the porch. I wasn't scared. Well, maybe just a little bit, but mostly I was just weirded the fuck out. As I was moving down the porch towards my bike, I caught a glimpse of two lights at the far end of the wavy road. It was a car. Finally, I thought. Ryan was around 10 minutes late. However, as the car was nearing the house, I began wondering who was driving Ryan back from football practice. His dad was on a business trip and wouldn't be back for another 2 weeks. Ryan himself was too young to drive a car, so who else? I was getting more and more anxious as the car was nearing the house. Who was driving Ryan back? The car pulled into the garage and stopped. Ryan was the first one to get out, giving me a, "What's up, man?" But the person who came out of the car next was his mother. She noticed me and asked how everything was. Our next tale is entitled Strangers in a Graveyard. A couple's late-night visit to a cemetery is meant to provide some cheap and harmless thrills. But the spirits of the deceased turn out to be the least of their worries. This tale was written by Matt Demirsky and is read by Max Glaspie.
The girl I'd been seeing suggested that, for our third date, we take a bottle of wine, a laptop, and a scary movie to the most remote graveyard we could possibly find. As horror movie aficionados, we both felt jaded and immune to fear, so putting ourselves into the ideal situation for terror sounded like an exciting adventure. The proposed night came, and she drove us an hour out into the deep back country, heading for a graveyard that we had found in an ancient public record, but which was not on any map. When we finally found its supposed location, we ended up having to park 3 miles away behind some large undergrowth. There had been no other place to turn off along the forested country road. The night air was cool, though, so the walk wasn't bad. We walked down a kind of raised ridge of dirt towards the unmarked graveyard, trying not to slip off into the pools of sludge and undergrowth on either side. The trees ringed an open double hill that led up into darkness, and the century-old gravestones sat about in silence. We set up our laptop on a blanket, unafraid, and started the movie. The atmosphere was powerfully creepy, but I still felt nothing, until the unexpected happened. Less than 10 minutes into the movie, we saw a pickup truck go by on the country road outside the graveyard. We could see its lights through the trees as it passed, the only vehicle we'd seen that night. We shrugged, thinking nothing of it, until it came back the other way. Its headlights were distinctive. It was definitely the same truck. When it approached the dirt ridge to the graveyard, moving very slowly, I closed the laptop and we froze as its headlights fell on us for a moment. The truck backed up, apparently turning around, and then proceeded to park right outside the entrance. We couldn't be sure if they had seen us, and we certainly had no idea what they were doing. I suggested we pack up, and my date agreed. We had just gathered all of our things when the truck went dark. We stood there in the pitch black for a few moments, confused. Who was in the truck? Had they seen us? Were they coming this way? There was no other way out of this graveyard. The hill was surrounded by what amounted to impassable swamp. I started imagining how we might escape through it regardless, but I realized that the attempt would make far too much noise. We'd never make it. We had no choice. Carrying our stuff, I grabbed her free hand with mine. We crept forward along the dirt ridge, wincing at every dried leaf that our shoes crumpled. I could see the truck's dark outline parked in our path, but I heard nothing. There was nothing else to do but creep past the truck, which we did slowly, one silent and carefully placed step at a time. I kept trying to discern shapes inside the truck, but saw nothing but darkness. I looked around constantly, but heard and saw nothing. Still, in the pitch-black night, I could hardly see the girl I was with, let alone somebody creeping about or following us. We made it past the truck, but the lack of any incident only increased our fear. Where were the truck's occupants? What were they doing? They had to be out here somewhere. Meaning we were out here in the middle of the night and nowhere, playing a potentially deadly game of hide and seek. My heart pounded even harder as I led her down the road toward our car. Where the hell were they? We were maybe half a mile down the road when we heard a scream in the woods and a distant gunshot. In that moment, we both immediately realized what was happening. The truck's occupants hadn't been here for us at all, but they would never let us leave if they knew we were here. We both started running in total panic and actually made it another mile or two before we saw the truck's distinctive headlights coming up on us. I grabbed her, jumped off of the road, and dove into the undergrowth and sludge between the trees. We peered through the bushes, waist deep in mud, and watched the truck go by. To our horror, the truck began to slow. I dropped the blanket. They'd seen it on the side of the road. The truck stopped there, only a few feet away, for what seemed like an hour. At any moment, I expected its occupants to get out and come for us. Instead, finally, amazingly, it pulled away and sped on down the road. I tried to see its license plate, but couldn't see anything through the glare of its lights. When I was convinced it was gone, we slogged out and started walking toward our car again. It was then that I had a horrible thought. What if they had found our car? What if they were waiting there? I talked it over with her, and we decided to find a good hiding spot in the muddy undergrowth and literally wait the entire night. We had heard a gunshot. This was serious. Neither of our cell phones had reception. There was no choice. The hours passed, and the longer we felt safe, the sillier we started to think ourselves. There had to have been another explanation, right? Even if there was something horrible going on in the woods, the truck's occupants couldn't have found our car. Or even if they did, they wouldn't wait so long, would they? After 2 hours, we almost talked ourselves out of our cold, horrid hiding place. Until I heard a slight sound, like shifting gravel. I peered intensely at the road. It was the same truck. Lights off, engine off, rolling ever so slowly along in the night. Waiting, looking, and listening for the fools that almost gave themselves up. It was noon the next day before we felt safe enough to leave our hiding spot and begin the confused and terrified walk back to civilization.
Our final tale is entitled A Debt to the Dead. The medical study of cadavers can be an unsettling but fascinating learning experience, until one student starts to discover more than expected from the bodies. This tale was written by Douglas Bramlett and is read by David Cummings. Back before I dropped out of pre-med, I had to take an advanced biology class, and being a little interested in the subject, I took gross anatomy. If you didn't know, this is a class whose lab work consists of dissecting a cadaver, or several. There's lots of classwork that goes along with it, lots of studying. Our professor had worked out some deal so that we could have multiple cadavers in the class, but we had to partner up and then cycle through the available cadavers each week towards the end of the semester. The guy I was partnered up with for lab times, Cliff, was apparently horrible at the classwork. Admittedly, it was a difficult class with a difficult professor at a difficult and prestigious school, but he was just horrible at the classwork. But in the lab, he was a genius. At least it seemed that way at first. As a part of the course, maybe to make it more interesting, maybe due to the source of the bodies, part of the labs involved determining cause of death as if we were criminal forensic investigators or some such. It was kind of cool sounding in class, but during lab time it was a different story. Each of the dozen corpses had been killed in a different way. Some of them were hard to look at. Oh, there were one or two who had an obvious cause of death, or at least so it seemed. A broken neck for one, a bullet hole in the head for the other. Alice, the one with the bullet hole, was our first cadaver. I thought it was easy. I mean, there's a bullet hole, there's a partially shattered skull. Shot, right? I was already writing it up when Cliff looks up from the body. Broken heart, he says. I don't think I said anything. I just stared at him, at the bullet hole, back at Cliff. He ran his hand over her lips, her throat, down between her breasts. She argued with him, had been drinking. He left, she fell, hit her head. He pointed to a discoloration on her temple. Her head was pounding. She felt like her heart was breaking. She shot herself, but by that point, she thought of herself as dead. She died of a broken heart. I dropped my clipboard and notes. Cliff jumped, startled. We had this argument about his conclusions and how he was jumping to them. Cliff asserted he was right. He wound up storming out. He got an A on the lab, I got a C. The next lab we had, I let Cliff have the first go. He touched the body like a lover, caressing it, lifting the cadaver's hand, smelling its fingernails, prodding its chest. He said that it was a car accident, that the guy had been smoking, had dropped hot ash in his lap, swerved. His chest was crushed by the steering wheel. This time, I wrote down every word Cliff said, or at least I tried. I had to fudge part of it, fill in what I remembered later, then find evidence on the body to support the claims. We both got A's. On and on it went, cadaver after cadaver, week after week. Cliff was like some modern-day, totally creepy Sherlock Holmes of dead bodies. He'd spend 5 minutes with one and then tell me everything that happened to the body in its last moments. It was strange, but we were totally acing our lab portion. Halfway through, though, the professor brought us in for a conference. Asked us if we'd been talking to someone at the city morgue or the police station. I think he thought that we were cheating somehow. But I backed up all of our work. After all, I'd found evidence on all the bodies to back up everything we'd put down in our lab reports. Cliff didn't say a word, just stared at the floor the whole time like he was angry or embarrassed or something. Afterwards, I confronted him. He wouldn't tell me anything at first, wouldn't tell me how he figured these things out. Only said something about it being a duty, a debt to the dead. He had to make sure their stories were true because most of them would never get to speak for themselves again. At the time, I thought all of that was metaphor, a way of rationalizing things, a noble-sounding excuse. As the semester started winding to a close, Cliff was in worse and worse shape. He was practically bombing out of most of his classes, or so I heard. In class, he'd seem listless, staring at the board or listening to the lecture and fidgeting in his seat. In lab, though, he'd come alive. He'd spent more time looking over each of the cadavers. He'd tell me things about them as if they were former friends of his. Like the guy with the 2 broken legs, Cliff told me about the time when the guy was 15 and stole his dad's boat to go fishing with a friend of his. How the 2 of them had spent the day drinking and then fell asleep in the boat, only to wake up after the thing had drifted and grounded itself the next state over. But the corpse was clearly an old man, and there was no way that Cliff had been his boating friend. It got creepy, but at the same time, Cliff was so suddenly open and friendly, talkative and extroverted that it was hard to ignore him. Then, the week before our exams, we were on to our last cadaver. The man with the broken neck. Again, for some reason, I thought it would be easy. Cliff spent a long time with the body. So long that I started to get nervous. Had his creepy gift given up the ghost? I stepped out of the lab room to, get a drink, take a leak, walk off some steam. When I got back, Cliff was standing by the shuttered windows. He was crying. Hell, he looked like someone who had been drinking for hours and then been punched in the crotch. His skin was sallow, he had dark circles under his eyes, and he was sweating profusely. There was the smell of stale vomit coming from one of the trash bins. I asked Cliff what was up. Something was obviously amiss. First week students puke up in the cadaver room, not end of the semester ones. Cliff pointed to our last lab project, the guy with the hangman's neck. He's a monster, Cliff sobbed. I looked at the body. I took some time and really looked at it. The neck was broken, obvious. There were multiple lacerations on the sides where the skin was torn. Not cut, the edges weren't even, but they were all small, grouped in sets of 2 to 4. The lower extremities were discolored, probably from post-mortem pooling of the blood. His penis, however, his whole crotch area was slightly disfigured. A botched circumcision as an infant, perhaps? Some sort of accident as a child, maybe? I thought I was starting to piece something together when suddenly Cliff spoke from right behind me. He was a monster, a molester, a predator. He hung himself rather than let the cops catch him, but he regretted it. He wanted to be famous, more than the power or the thrill. Cliff stopped, retching again, then wiping his mouth on his sleeve. More than those things, he wanted to be famous. What about his, victims? I asked. Cliff's eyes were wild, terrified, awful. They're in there with him, he whispered. He was shaking, trembling. He clenched his teeth and shut his eyes. You told me you owe the dead a debt, I said to Cliff, putting my hands on his shoulders. That you have to tell their stories? You have to be a voice for them when they can't? He nodded, sobbing. Then maybe, in this case, you should keep silent. Silence his voice. I jerked my head towards the body behind me, so that his victims' voices fade away as well. Cliff nodded, tears and snot running down his face. He started sobbing again. Then he slumped to the floor. I can't, he wailed. I can't keep quiet. I owe them. It's a duty, a debt. I nodded, turning away from him. I couldn't watch him any longer. I crushed his skull with a metal tray, made it look like he'd slipped and hit his head on the dissecting table. Got rid of the evidence. That's his story. My debt is paid. What follows is the transcript of an interview between parapsychologist Moses Harlow and Marine Corporal Brandon Fitz, E4, held in late 2004. Fitz was pronounced deceased after suffering a cardiac arrest during the Second Battle of Fallujah. He returned to life 13 hours later.
Look, sir, do we really gotta go over all this again? I already said everything I can remember, and, I'm tired, sir. Real tired. I mean, I just came back from the dead, you know?
I understand, son. Now look, this will be the last time, I promise. Now, let's get started, huh? What have they told you about why you're here?
Well, sir, they said that I was a danger to myself and others, whatever that means. All I remember is waking up here.
You see that screen on the wall? I'd like you to watch a recording and tell me what you see.
I'll do my best, sir, but it's pretty grainy. Okay. That's a med bay. Those are body bags. And that's... oh shit, that's me.
And what are you doing?
Just laying there, looks like. No, wait. Flailing my arms around. Some NCOs are running in to hold me down. My back's bridging. It looks like I'm screaming something, but I can't make out what.
You sure you don't recognize the word, son? Hjorthur. Doesn't mean anything to you?
No, sir.
It's an Old Norse word. Hjorthur. Means battle. Now, why would you be screaming a word like that? A word you claim you don't recognize?
I don't know, sir. I'm sorry, sir.
You can drop the sir. I'm not military. Just call me Mr. Harlow.
If you say so. But if you're not cooler, then why?
Let's just get back to the interview, shall we? Sooner we finish here, the sooner you can go eat and get some rest. I'd bet you like that, wouldn't you, Brandon?
Sure would, sir. Mr. Harlow.
Tell me, Brandon, what's the last thing you remember from Iraq?
Well, an IED had just gone off, and me and my buddy Vickers, that's Lance Corporal Ryan Vickerman, by the way, were hunkered down in what was left of somebody's living room. We couldn't see where the shots were coming from, so Vickers just blasted away with his M9 at anything that moved. Some shrapnel grazed my face, and then I got this pain in my chest. After that, I just sort of blacked out. It was like falling asleep, you know? And after that...
Yes, Brandon?
I was cold. Colder than I've ever been in my life. Snow was falling on my face and I was laying in more of it, so thick that I couldn't feel the ground beneath. I wasn't wearing any clothes. It sounds crazy, right? Like I pinched myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming, but it was real. At least, it felt real to me. Who knows? Maybe I am crazy.
Let me be the judge of that. What could you see around you?
There were a bunch of tall pine trees behind me. And I mean tall, like over 100 feet. And in front was just more snow, as far as I could see. Nothing moved but the wind. It's funny. You'd think I would have been wondering where I was or how I'd gotten there, but I took it all in stride. I didn't want to move too far from where I'd woken up, so I called out for help. And someone came.
You're shaking. Are you all right?
Yeah, it's just... I could use a cigarette.
Help yourself.
Thanks. I'm surprised y'all are letting me smoke in here.
Now, this is no ordinary hospital, Brandon, and I'm no ordinary doctor. Now, you were telling me about what happened when you called out for help.
Thanks. That's better. Look, in boot camp, we learn how to kill people, right? I fired my weapon at insurgents, and I got no way to know whether I wasted any of them. The bullets could have been mine, they could have been my buddies. There's no way to tell, but when it's up close and personal, this guy, he came running out of the woods. A Japanese guy with glasses, waving one of those swords, you know? He was yelling the same word over and over. I didn't know the language, but somehow I knew what it meant.
Hjorthur.
Yeah. Anyway, at that point, I guess the training took over. I caught him by the wrist and flipped him, a classic over-the-hip throw, and we started fighting for control of the sword. That thing was so sharp it cut into my arm like butter, but I was fighting for my life, and I had gravity on my side. I got the blade angled over the guy's neck. He was kicking and squirming for all he was worth, but at that point, all I really had to do was put my weight into it.
This is difficult for you.
I heard it sinking into him, okay? I felt the metal scraping against his collarbone. I saw his eyes get wide and then go hazy. I felt his feet stop kicking. And the smell. I cleaned myself up as best I could. Cut some strips of cloth from the guy's clothes to wrap my arm. He was wearing this old-fashioned uniform, like the one they had back in World War II, you know? He'd come at me like he was possessed or something. I didn't know what was wrong with him or if there were more like him out there, so I made for the woods. It seemed to be a good idea to get under cover. The forest, man. How can I even begin to describe it? It was so dark in there, it was like the sun had already set. And it was quiet. Real quiet. Like I was almost scared to breathe, you know? And wherever I looked, those mossy tree trunks went on forever. I picked a direction and started walking. What else could I do? Naked and hurt as I was surprised I could even move at all. I felt this tug in my chest, like a weight pulling me forward. That feeling kept getting stronger and stronger until...
Until what?
Until I got impaled by a goddamn spear, that's what. There was a whooshing sound, and I felt this white-hot pain in my gut. When I looked down, it was hanging out of my stomach. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? Before I could wrap my head around what had just happened, another spear came flying out of nowhere. It bounced off my rib cage, but I went down anyways. And then 4 shadowy figures stood up out of the snow. They'd been there all along, hunting me. They were tall African guys with these shields made out of cowhide and, of course, more spears. What's the closest you've ever come to dying, Mr. Harlow?
Let's not get off track. What happened next?
I only ask because I've been a dead man, Mr. Harlow. More times than I can count. What do you think happened next? They gutted me like a goddamn fish. They would stab, twirl around me, and stab again. It was some kind of war dance. I could feel the warmth of my own intestines dragging underneath me as I tried to crawl away. My hands kept slipping in the blood and pine needles. Then everything went dark. Next thing I knew, it was after sunset. I was numb, cold as a block of ice. And then I felt my heart begin to beat. My blood flowed back into me. The holes on my skin healed themselves up. It was like invisible hands were packing my guts into my body, snapping my bones back into place. Look, man, I thought dying had felt strange, but getting put back together felt even stranger. Looking up through the branches, I could see these streams of color in the sky. Pink and green and blue. Northern Lights, I think they're called.
The Aurora Borealis. Yes?
That's when I realized I wasn't alone. There was a woman there, on a white horse, and her eyes were as bright as the lights in the sky. She was tall and blonde and dressed in armor, and she threw me over the back of her horse like I weighed nothing at all. We galloped faster and faster, and pretty soon I couldn't hear the horse's hoofbeats on the ground. We were flying. I hung onto that horse's neck for dear life, sure that at any minute I might slip off, but the woman held me in place with one hand. Her grip was like iron. We were approaching this big wooden building down below. It's funny, even though I had a bird's eye view of the place, I couldn't have said how tall it was or how many entrances it had. It was like my brain just couldn't process the whole thing at once, you know?
I need you to do better than that. Surely you can give me some details about what the building looked like or what it was made of.
Like I said, mister, I'm tired. I really don't think I got all the fancy architectural vocabulary you want to hear. But if you get me a pencil and paper, I can draw it for you.
All right, here you are.
Thanks. Anyway, this woman's horse trotted right down out of the sky. She pushed me off of it and toward the door of the lodge or whatever it was. It looked a hell of a lot bigger from the ground, let me tell you. The walls were made of these big timber beams. The roof was so high I could barely see it. The whole place was lit by firelight, and as I walked in, I saw some faces I recognized. The Japanese guy and the 4 Africans who'd ambushed me a few hours earlier. I freaked out and started fumbling around for a weapon. Then I realized that all of them were smiling. The Japanese guy was holding something out to me. It was my uniform, folded and washed, the one that I'd died in. One of the African guys clapped me on the back and handed me a horn, like a real cow horn with some kind of booze in it, and then the 4 of them went inside into the party.
You interacted with them, these people who tried to kill you.
Well, yeah. The Japanese dude was named Hiroyuki. He had wanted to study archaeology in Tokyo, but when the war started, he lied about his bad vision and joined up. Mwendo, the African guy who'd handed me a drink, he was a real character. To hear him tell it, he had had 3 wives and killed a lion before his balls dropped. He said that...
So you were aware then that the others were also dead?
Look, mister, the only thing I was aware of was that I didn't want to get killed 3 times in one day. Those guys could have said that they were clowns from Venus, and I would have said, sure man, right on. Everybody in the place was some kind of warrior or another, and the last thing I wanted to do was piss anybody off. So I just sort of went with the flow. There were these guys in wooden thrones sitting at a high table, like kings or something. One of them was missing an eye, I remember that. Another one had a big hammer. More of those tall women in armor were bringing drinks around, but they were a lot less cold than they had seemed at first, if you get my drift. I drank until I passed out. It was wild. Here's your drawing, by the way.
Thank you. Would you say, then, that it was a pleasant experience?
Well, yeah, but also not really. Especially not if you consider what came afterwards. See, there was something sort of bloodthirsty about the whole thing. Those colorful banners on the walls and carvings on those big wooden columns looked pretty at first, until I realized that they all just showed a bunch of gruesome deaths in battle. And the others, most of them didn't seem quite right in the head. All they talked about was war, how many they'd killed, the most gruesome ways they'd done it, their favorite weapons for chopping off different body parts. It seemed like the more brutal you were, the closer you sat to the big table. And that wasn't all. You see, I had woken up naked. Now I had my uniform and boots back, but that was a long way from the stuff some of those guys had. Shields, bows, full body armor. Hiroyuki didn't have the sword I'd taken from him during our fight, but Mwendo and his buddies were all carrying brand new helmets. I figured that the more fights you won, the better gear you got. And look, I like to drink as much as anybody, but the booze was sort of pushed on us, like we had to black out before the night could end. Like it was some kind of ritual. The next thing I remember, I was waking up on some kind of foggy beach. The lodge, or whatever it was gone. I had no idea how I'd gotten there. I should have had the worst hangover of my life, but my head was totally clear. All I felt was a sort of weird itching sensation. I was still wearing my uniform, but at some point a bayonet knife had been put into my hand. I wasn't alone. There were hundreds of us. Some with turbans and scimitars, others with green fatigues and trench spikes, and everything in between. We looked at each other. There was no sound but the cold black waves crashing against the rocks, and that itching feeling was getting stronger and stronger. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears, loud as thunder. I kept gripping the bayonet knife tighter and tighter, and before I knew what I was doing, I had grabbed the guy next to me and plunged it into his neck. Hey, mister, you ever hear the expression, saw red? I never really knew what it meant until that morning.
What do you think was happening to you?
That itch, man. It got to the point that I wanted to cut my own skin off, but even that wouldn't be enough. There was only one way to get rid of it. I knew it in my heart, as sure as I knew my own name. I had to bathe in my enemy's blood. We were all feeling the same thing, and sooner or later, we all gave in to the urge. I found Mwendo and his brothers, and for a while we fought together, taking down more skilled and better equipped warriors. Teamwork is dream work, right? But by nightfall, we had turned on each other too.
By nightfall. Are you implying that you spent the entire day fighting?
You never been in many scraps, have you, mister? When it's hand to hand, the minutes feel like hours and the adrenaline burns you out real quick. Your muscles go all limp and rubbery from so much impact. Your ears are ringing from the clash of metal on metal, or maybe from a blow to the head. Your eyes sting so much from the sweat and blood that you can barely see what you're hitting. Most people can't last even 15 minutes in a fight like that, and just because we were dead didn't make us special. Just because we had swords and spears and axes didn't make this a fancy duel between knights. This was biting, bashing, grinding faces into the mud. Whoever was less exhausted and less taken by surprise usually won the fight, and then was killed themselves. The difference was, for us, it didn't end there. We rose again, and again, and again.
Until nightfall.
Right, until nightfall, when those cold-eyed women on horseback came to take us back to the Great Hall. Hey, do you mind if I take a walk around the room a little bit? Telling this story has got me tense. I need to stretch out a little bit.
Oh, sure. Feel free. Now, did these women or anyone else ever explain why you were doing all this?
Well, I mean, the guys with the red crosses stitched onto their chests said that we were training to fight Satan. A guy with 2 scimitars and a turban said we were there to purify our souls, whatever the hell that means. Nobody could give me a straight answer, and the ones who'd been there the longest were too far gone to talk to.
I'm sorry, too far gone. What do you mean by that?
They were nuts. Some of them didn't even remember their own names. They used the sound of a shield bash or an arrow instead. Others called themselves by the number of kills they'd made. One of them, this huge Mexican guy with a jaguar skin hood and a club with sharp stones sticking out of it, called himself 13,724. That was the only word he would say. The next night, that word became 13,866. I believe it too. He split my skull in half twice in one day, and last I saw it took about 15 working together to bring him down. What was I supposed to say? Hey, Mr. Mass Murderer, want to give me a quick rundown of what we're doing here? I did figure out one thing that night, though. There was something special about the drink they were giving us.
Special? How so?
I drank more that second night. A lot more. I threw back cup after cup of that honey sweet booze until I thought I'd burst. Maybe I was trying to drink myself into a second death, or maybe I was just trying to forget. Who knows? What I did notice, though, was the result. The next day, I was faster, tougher, and stronger than I'd ever been. It was like my instincts were turned up to 11. So was my thirst for blood. The first day, I killed because I had to. The second day, I actually found myself enjoying it. Disturbing as that was, the drink of the dead had another side effect, one that I didn't notice until a few days later. I was forgetting more and more details about the person I'd been. There were plenty of things about myself that I didn't remember until you all reminded me of them, but you knew that already, right?
I've seen the recordings, yes.
It was a paradox. If you drank the stuff, you forgot who you'd been yourself. If you didn't, you got hacked apart 100 times over by the ones who did. Someone like you, someone who has never even died once, can't even imagine what that's like. Sure, we rose again every time we fell, but we felt every second of it. And the ones who had been there the longest, they liked to kill you in ways you'd remember. Ugh.
Are you all right, Brandon?
Yeah, just thinking. Anyway, once I realized what was going on, I decided I would pay the price. I wouldn't drink the stuff they gave us. It was harder than it sounds. Everyone else seemed to be chugging it like there was no tomorrow, and those cold-eyed attendants were always ready with a cup and smoldering glance your way. They watched us like hawks. They wanted to make sure we drank it. Look, if you'd like, I can draw one of them for you. Still got that paper and pencil?
Here's the paper, but don't you still have the pencil?
I would have sworn I gave it back to you.
No matter, here's another.
Thanks. Anyway, like I was saying, I went through all kinds of tricks to keep that stuff out of my gut. I let it spill down the front of my shirt, passed my mug around, then poured what was left into my boot. Everything I could think of. At first, I screwed up a lot. I could feel them getting suspicious, and I had to drink more just to throw them off track. You might wonder why I bothered hiding it at all, but if you'd been there, you'd understand. The threat of violence was everywhere in that place. They could kill me and resurrect me as many times as they wanted. Who knows what else they could do to me if I pissed them off. Eventually, though, I got good enough that I could stay sober almost every night. And once I did, I started asking questions. Hiroyuki never slammed down as much of the stuff as the others, and when he fought, he did what he had to, no more, no less. He didn't seem to enjoy gory deaths the way some of the others did, so I figured I'd start with him. During the next day's battle, I lured Hiroyuki away from the others and wrestled him to the ground. Instead of dealing the finishing blow, I asked him what he thought about what we were being made to do. I asked Hiroyuki if he knew, or he'd even heard of, a way out of this place.
How did he respond?
We have to fight. We all have to fight. That's what he said. And the alternative is even worse. Before I could even ask him what he meant, I heard the snort of a horse and then felt a tall, cold shadow fall over me. It was the women. 2 of them. I tried to run, but one fired an arrow into my side and the other crushed my shoulders in her armored fists. Even if I would have chugged a bottomless cup of that drink the night before, I still wouldn't have been able to resist them. They were just too strong. The cold-eyed woman pushed me toward the ground. I thought she was going to suffocate me in the mud as some kind of punishment, which would have hurt, but it wouldn't have been the first time either. What they had in mind for me and Hiroyuki, though, was much worse.
Go on, son. It's all right.
The ground opened up in front of me. I could see down through the dirt and rock to a sort of underground world. It was piled high with corpses, or that's what I thought at first, until I realized those gray and decaying things were somehow still conscious. I couldn't begin to count how many there were. Billions, maybe, all stacked on top of each other, squirming and stretching their rotten fingers out to me, begging silently to be lifted up, to rise to where I was. And in that moment, I knew, down there, the darkness was never brightened, thirst and hunger were never quenched. There was nothing but an endless, infinite night. And after that, I was back here with all of you good people. I found your pencil.
Oh, where
I
was...
jammed the other one under the door while I was stretching to make sure we wouldn't be interrupted. Didn't I tell you that I'd gotten good at hiding things? Now, Mr. Harlow, I'm gonna need you to take your half and fight me to the death with it.
Well, I mean, Brandon, let's just calm down now. We can talk about this.
No, this is the only way. See, down there, that pit, it's for all those who die peacefully. Heaven, or what passes for heaven, belongs to those who die fighting. I'm not going to the pit, Mr. Harlow, and with any luck, neither are you. Huh? No! What? No! Arthur! Arthur!
Corporal Fitz died of blunt force trauma sustained while NCOs attempted unsuccessfully to prevent him from murdering Moses Harlow. The results of Fitz's autopsy were not unusual for a young man of his age and background. Apart from a perfectly preserved Norse arrowhead, exact age unknown, which was found embedded near the patient's liver. Have you ever considered online dating? We like to ensure you're fully informed about all the aspects of it, So let's meet a woman on a date with a man she met online. And when a storm causes a blackout, you might assume things are going to get very romantic in the dark. But in this tale, shared with us by author K. Wallace King, the couple instead decide to tell each other scary stories. And when it comes to these stories, truth, as they say, can be stranger than fiction. Performing this tale are Kristen DiMercurio, Atticus Jackson, and Ellie Hirschman. So it may be dark in there, but keep your eyes open in case you see something at the edges.
We had just finished dinner when the lights went out. A wild winter storm was sweeping through the Los Angeles night, bringing threats of severe flooding. Lightning illuminated the apartment in a brief flash of cold light, and the dark that followed seemed thicker, denser.
Don't worry. I've got an earthquake kit with candles. I'll be right back.
I sat alone at the dining table, wind whistling, the rain beating furiously. A tree branch, Jack said it was a California loquat, smacked the window, and the dim outline of leaves fluttered the glass like drowning butterflies. I got up to find my phone. I could use its flashlight. But the dark apartment was unfamiliar, and I couldn't recall where I had set it down. Within moments, I'd banged into something, guessing it was the glass-fronted curio cabinet. Before dinner, I'd seen the knickknacks displayed inside. Pez dispensers, Hot Wheels, still in their original packaging, a baseball autographed indecipherably. But what had caught my eye was the plastic action figure of a superhero I didn't recognize. It was posed oddly, head down, as if it were climbing headfirst from down one shelf to the next. I thought at first it wore a mask, like Batman's Robin, but leaning closer, I realized its eyes were blacked out, with a thick swipe of magic marker. "What's that?" Jack had laughed.
That's Druso. Only appeared in issue 1 of the Walk into Fright comic book series, so he's rare.
So what's his superpower?
A Druso can climb between worlds.
I'd put my hand on the door latch to get a closer look, but Jack gently pulled me away.
Door's warped.
What's with the eyes? Jack then asked if I knew how to make guacamole. I didn't, but as he was already walking toward the kitchen, I offered to help. After my second glass of wine, I'd forgotten about the weird action figure in the cabinet. Now, rubbing my banged shin in the dark, a creepy thought occurred to me. The blinded doll didn't need to see. I patted my way to the safety of the dining table and sat down. A moment later, I heard Jack muttering in the hallway. There was a loud crash, like something heavy fell or was dropped. "You okay?" He didn't answer. The apartment was silent except for the tree branch scratching the window, the rain pounding the roof. He'd been gone a long time. Had he really? I wished I had my phone. Maybe it just seemed long because it was so dark. But what was he doing, all that banging around in the hallway?
Be there in a minute.
Not every man online is an asshole, I reminded myself. There were exceptions. Hadn't Hannah married a guy she met on that dating site? And Jack and I had progressed to this get-to-know-you date. The first was coffee, though it had morphed to a drink, and we'd ended up almost closing the bar down. And tonight he'd made me dinner. While I watched him chop the onions, I'd had a moment wishing he'd lean over the cutting board and kiss me.
It's dead!
I jumped and let out a little scream as I stared into the dark hallway.
My phone! Forgot to charge it.
Jack lit a candle and set it on the table. His face bobbed across from me in a bubble of light.
A few months ago, the electricity in the hills was out for 3 days.
He placed tea light candles around the room. Little archipelagos of light floated in the dark.
How about a card game? Poker? Rummy?
Never played much. We sat in silence as thunder grumbled. In the glare of lightning, I caught a glimpse of the blind doll hanging upside down in the cabinet, The little candle islands around the room seemed to make the dark between them vaster. I don't know this man. What am I doing here? Think the street's flooded?
I wouldn't try driving now. Might be mudslides.
Jack leaned back in his chair. An awkward silence followed, and I couldn't see his eyes. Maybe I should have agreed to cards. Jack leaned toward the candlelight. He was grinning. His eyes twinkled. I thought, what serial killer has ever been described with twinkling eyes? So, ghost stories?
What you got?
Really? He smiled at me encouragingly, poured another glass of wine, and pushed it across the table. He filled his own glass and held it up in a salute. In the dim candlelight, it was dark as blood.
Is it true? Your ghost story?
I shrugged. Who knows what lies behind the veil? We both turned to the dark hallway, where the wood floor had just creaked loudly.
Uh-oh. Who's that?
I snorted a laugh, but it did spook me a little.
This place is old. Let's hear it. Scare me.
It almost sounded like a challenge, and I decided to drop the silly story I'd planned to tell. It wasn't any scarier than the type told at camp or slumber parties. I would tell this man about an experience I still found disturbing. I'd never told anyone about it before. I was living in New York, Hell's Kitchen, with an ex of mine. We'd recently rented an apartment in an old brick tenement building. Frank Dooley was our landlord. His family had an old-school butcher shop on the ground floor. Been there for 3 generations. They still sprinkled sawdust to soak up blood from butchering. I could get a fresh chicken for $5. Frank told me an Irish gang used to get rid of their murder victims in these old tenements. Frank said our building was one of these. Bury them in the foundation when they were being built, brick them up in the walls. You've probably heard these legends, but Frank said he knew it was true because his great-grandfather had run that gang. Frank leaned extra hard on the tough New Yorker act. He thought it was funny because I was from Ohio. It was an ugly apartment, freezing cold, often smelled like garbage due to the dumpster under our kitchen window. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and the second I turned on the light, cockroaches scurried like confused drunks. The bathroom was the only room with a door. Everything else was just a space with a shitty radiator and water stains on the ceiling. We'd hung a blanket in one corner around our bed to make a separate space. The kitchen was tiny, and from the counter, you could see the whole room, from the door to the bathroom. That night, I was cooking something, and I heard heavy footsteps, like someone was walking on the wood floor of our apartment, but clearly no one was. Adam was taking a shower, the bathroom door was closed, and I heard the shower running. Must be the guy upstairs walking around in boots, even though I knew the footsteps I heard weren't over my head. They were in the middle of the room, which now looked strange. I rubbed my eyes. The room seemed wavy, distorted somehow, as if I were at the bottom of a swimming pool and looking up through the water at the room around me. The footsteps stopped, but as I stood at the kitchen counter, I could see in the center of the room in front of me, something was slowly spinning like a small cyclone. It spun faster and faster, growing in velocity and size. I'd thought at first maybe it was dust, but there was no breeze. All the windows were shut. Just then, the smoke alarm went off. That maddening beeping must have been developed as a form of torture, and I turned to the stove expecting something to be burning, but the stove was off. There was a bang, like the sound a raging wind makes when it bangs into something solid. I turned back to the room to see Adam was whirling like some crazed dervish weird dance. The alarm was blaring, and I yelled for Adam to turn it off because I couldn't reach it. Instead, he darted behind the blanket separating the bed from the rest of the room. But the alarm was making me so crazy, I forgot about Adam. I climbed onto a chair and ripped that alarm right off the wall. It still wouldn't stop, so I dropped it into the sink and ran water over it until it finally shut up. Silence, thick as a blanket, except for one sound. The shower. It was still running, The bathroom door was still closed. I threw the bathroom door open. I'll never forget Adam's face when he furiously poked his head around the plastic shower curtain. Why the hell was I letting in all the freezing air? I don't know how long I stood there. Adam glowering, the shower running. My brain was scrambling. How could I have thought that was Adam? It hadn't looked anything like him, but strangely, I couldn't remember quite what it had looked like. I tried to reconstruct features, but they were as filmy as the dissolving steam in the bathroom. I only had an impression of eyes and a face puffy as a cloud, but the boots, I definitely heard those. I screamed at Adam that a man had broken in. I pointed to the curtain. Adam raced from the bathroom with a plunger and yanked the blanket to the floor, revealing only the unmade bed. I was flabbergasted, but I heard those boots. I saw. What had I seen, though, really? I couldn't even describe it. Months passed. Life went on. Nothing else happened until that summer. I had the windows wide open, listening to the radio. For once, the garbage stink was blowing across town. I distinctly remember the station, which usually played current pop songs, was suddenly playing an old-timey tune. Fast, happy tempo. Made me think of those women flappers dancing kind of frantically, like, you better hurry up and have fun because it might end tomorrow. Right then, I heard the boots in the center of the floor, even though there was no one there but me. And everything looked underwater again. I sat there, watching this little whirling cyclone rising from the rug, sparkling in the sunlight. It spun faster, and I thought I could see the boots, and faintly, 2 legs. It's trying to become. I think I said that out loud. And then I ran. I didn't even take my purse. I sat on the front stoop until Adam came home, and even then, he had to practically drag me inside. We broke up a week later. Wasn't surprising. We'd been unraveling for a while. I made plans to stay with a girlfriend, and I was packing when a pipe burst, flooding the closet where I kept all my clothes. I got the super, and he knocked a hole in the closet wall to get the pipe. 2 things fell out of the wall and onto the floor with a bang. A pair of leather boots. As if on cue, the candle on the table between us sputtered and went out. The tea lights around the room seemed distant as stars. I had forgotten where I was, lost in the story I was telling. I had that sinking, sick feeling when the super showed me that man's boots. I know you think I just made it up, but...
Listen.
I looked around the room. What? He grabbed my hand and pulled me out of my chair, weaving us across the candlelit room to the balcony. Outside, the wind blew a cold mist in my face. It's so foggy.
Rain stopped, but the streets flooded. You couldn't see to drive in this pea soup. I'm afraid you're stuck with me a while longer.
He was behind me. I felt his breath on my neck. Once again, I found myself hoping he'd kiss me, but instead, he wove me back through the flickering candles to the table.
My turn.
Turn? I don't get it. Jack relit the candle on the table. The flame flared, and a shadow flitted across his features like a mask, reminding me of the creepy blinded doll climbing in the cabinet.
It happened when I was a kid.
Oh, Jack was going to tell a story. I smiled, relieved. A kid's ghost story. Okay, scare me. I was reaching for the wine bottle when he grabbed my hand.
Sure you want to hear it?
He looked so earnest, different, almost childlike. For sure. He let go of my hand. It dropped to the table and lay there a moment between us, before I pulled it away with an embarrassed giggle. Jack didn't notice. He'd started his story.
Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas, Hughes Aircraft. The aerospace industry was based in Southern California. My dad was an engineer at Lockheed. In the 70s, they needed more housing, so they built Ocean Vista Village. One of those California cookie-cutter developments. After Ocean Vista opened, it became clear something was wrong. Carpeting constantly smelled of mildew. Anytime someone would plant a tree or put in a row of hedges, instead of growing up, they appeared to be shrinking. One resident said their doghouse, with their dog inside, vanished overnight, as if the earth had swallowed it. People claimed they could roll a marble without stopping from the living room to the back porch. Turned out Vista Village had been built on badly filled marshland. The development was gradually sinking, but people had spent hard-earned money to buy these houses and they fought to keep them. Then girls around town began disappearing, and not long after, their bodies were found in one of the houses. It had never been sold, so there was no owner. They never learned who the psycho was who dumped the dead girls there. But that was the last straw, and the city condemned Ocean Vista. The people moved out, and no trespassing signs went up. It's all gone now, a protected wetland, but back then, all those empty houses, those sinking streets, were a wonderland for a kid. It was a perfect hellscape for skateboards, bike ramps, teenagers, and drugs. I met this kid named Luca. It happened when I knocked him down with my bike. He materialized seemingly out of nowhere when I was rushing home to eat a pizza before my mom saw it. She was a bit of a health nut. The kid crumpled in front of my handlebars like a Kleenex. I thought he was knocked out, but he got up and, without a word, started limping away. I felt bad, so I caught up, said I was sorry, have some pizza. The box was still warm. Luca ate the whole fucking pie like he was starving, and he handed me the greasy box. He pointed at my backpack. I realized he meant the comic book sticking out. It was the first edition of Walk into Fright, and Druso the Dimensioner was on the cover.
Let me see.
I handed him the comic and he sat down on the curb, flipping through it like I wasn't even there.
Careful, don't bend the pages. You give to me.
Pizza was one thing, but I'd been looking forward to this series for over a year, and the guy at Red Rocket Comics told me it would probably become a collector's item.
You almost killed me.
No way, dude. He looked like he was about to cry. But you can read it any time at my house. The way he stared at me made me squirm, though I wasn't sure why. He was much shorter than me and blubbery. He had on grimy shorts and his t-shirt was so thin I could almost see his pasty skin. He had a dopey Three Stooges haircut. Told me later that his father really did cut his hair with a bowl. Behind his glasses, his eyes kind of bulged and were a blue so pale they were almost colorless. He had a weird accent, too. When I asked him where he was from, he just said, "The mountains." I didn't ask him to be more specific. I just turned 12 and I wasn't having the best summer. My friends were away at camp and we couldn't afford for me to go. My mom and dad were getting a divorce. He'd moved out. Anyway, back then you made friends a lot easier, so we just started hanging out. Luca lived in a shitty apartment building over by the refinery. Said his dad worked the night shift somewhere. I was never supposed to knock on the door because it would wake up his dad, so I'd just throw a couple of BBs at Luke's window and we'd take off on our bikes for Ocean Vista. This particular afternoon was overcast, and we lifted our bikes over the chain-link fence that kept absolutely no one out, just in time for a drizzling mist to roll in off the ocean. It was weird riding down those crumbling streets. It felt like you were riding on an invisible snake because the asphalt undulated up and down. Things in Ocean Vista didn't sink at the same pace. As we rode down streets with names like Spinnaker Avenue and Seahorse Lane, the humidity rose until it felt like I was riding through a wet towel. The mist cloaked front yards and mailboxes at the end of driveways. It was as if Ocean Vista was not only sinking, it was being slowly erased. We rode down the streets side by side, watching for sinkholes. When a house would pop out of the drizzle, it was like it had slipped the skin of another dimension. It was eerily quiet that afternoon. Maybe because the weather was shitty, no teenagers were blasting Megadeth or Sabbath. The only sound was seagulls squawking over the garbage they left behind. Once, riding down a street I didn't remember even noticing before, the mist parted long enough for me to see a face in a window. A homeless drunk, I told myself, but pedaled faster. By the time we got to our hideout, it was starting to rain, and Luke shoved the front door open with his shoulder. The door was warped. His houses were pretty much alike. Peeling linoleum in the kitchen, mold-infested drywall. I picked this one for the Harley-Davidson sticker on the mailbox. I'd just seen Easy Rider on TV, and I badly wanted a chopped Harley with ape-hanger handlebars like Captain America. Luke hadn't seen the movie. He didn't have a TV.
Well,
I'd explained,
Billy and Captain America ride across the USA on motorcycles and do drugs with girls in a cool cemetery. Sad ending, though.
Then I pulled out my Galaxy tape player and played Born to Be Wild. Luke started doing this crazy jig. Picture a worm being electrocuted. Luke shouted over the music, still wriggling.
Captain of America is rad, dude.
Thanks to me, Luke's vocabulary was quickly expanding.
Was, Luke. He was.
The house smelled pretty much like an unflushed toilet, but we were used to it. Soon we were sitting on the moldy couch, smoking the Virginia Slims I stole from my sister, and leafing through the damp porno mags we'd found under a collapsing bed. Sadly, most pages had become glued together. The light was always dim and greenish because of the overgrown vegetation outside, and it was strange sitting in a house you knew was sinking slowly, like quicksand. You knew you were doomed, but it was going to take a long time. When I looked out the picture window, everything was this pillowy gray, as if clouds had landed in the yard or the house was already submerged. I told Luke that maybe we ought to get going. It looked like it was about to rain harder. Beside me, Luke lit another Virginia Slim.
My father is a monster. At night, he goes out and finds people.
In that wavy underwater light, his pale, froggy eyes gleamed as he stared at me, waiting for a reaction.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Luke grinned.
Want to hear a story, Jackie?
He dropped a still-lit match on the damp carpet. I heard it sizzle before it went out. Another time. Let's go.
I didn't know my father was monster at first. You ask about Mom? She is dead. Daddy dead. Poor Mama. Bummer. So my father, he brings me here. California. America the Great. Sometimes, though, he speaks the old language. If I do, he slaps my mouth. Oh, don't look sad, dude. He got me that bike out there. Rad, right? From Sears. Got it in the night when no one is there. And I read to him, Jackie, Treasure Island. And Charlotte's Web? He cries. Yeah, dude, big cry, baby.
Luke laughed, slapped his knee.
At night, I listen to the radio. 0 Hour. Rod Sterling, while I make the hamburger helper. I like rice-a-roni best. Dude, in San Francisco, it is the favorite food. Do you think the Captain of America likes rice-a-roni?
No doubt, man. I didn't have the heart to tell him it was a stupid jingle. What do you mean about Sears at night? You mean he stole it?
Father sleeps in the bedroom. Me in living room. I'm not allowed in the bedroom. He locks it. Sometimes he leaves when it's dark, but he doesn't go out the front door and he doesn't come out of the bedroom. I watch from the living room window, peek around the curtain. You know, we are on the second floor, so how does he get out? I'll tell you, dude. My father, he goes out his bedroom window and climbs down the tree. What do you call it? Little orange fruits, birds like them.
And it's a loquat. I knew because we had one in our backyard. We should get going. Luke pointed to his glasses.
I watch him, Jackie, at night, in the dark. Out the window he goes and climbs, like a spider, my father, down that tree, crawling, head first.
I thought he worked the night shift. Where'd you say it was? Luke waved a hand toward the beach. I assumed he meant the refinery. He elbowed me, snickering.
He doesn't know. I watch him, dude. He would whip me if he knew. Don't look worried, Jackie. I am so careful. Now listen. Last night, I hear him in the tree, leaves flapping like crazy bird wings. But I go to the window too late. He's already in the bedroom. I hear a loud noise like he dropped something. Then, Jackie, I hear him. He is pulling something on the floor. Swoosh, swoosh, it goes. Must be heavy. And I hear breathe. And what do you call it? Sad puppy sound? Whimpering?
You mean whimpering? Luke made an exaggerated crying face. This is a weird-ass story, dude. Luke nodded emphatically.
Weird ass.
It was early evening and the light inside the house was evaporating. It had started raining pretty good. Luke's eyes almost glowed behind his glasses. He leaned close. His breath was foul, and I wondered if he'd ever been to a dentist. I leaned away, but he scooted closer. His face almost pressed to mine.
Last night, dude, I see the girl.
He was creeping me out now. I stood up, tucked the cigarettes in my t-shirt pocket. So your old man's got a girlfriend. I'm going home, dude. Luke grabbed my arm and pulled me back beside him on the couch.
Oh man, broke it.
He held up his broken cigarette. We ought to hit it before it rains harder.
Wait, Jackie, wait. There is a space under the door. I can see light from the bedroom. I go to the door, careful. The floor makes noise, so I go on hands, my knees. I listen, but it is quiet. I hear my heart, afraid father will hear. So I hold my breath, dragging again. You know how you do when something is heavy? Oof, you go. Then, boom, the heavy gets dropped, and again, sad puppy is whispering. I put my head sideways on the floor. Look, like this.
Luke cranked his head to the side so far I was surprised I didn't hear a snap.
I see with only one eye under the door crack my father's sneakers. Sandy, like he was at the beach. But he hates the beach, hates the ocean, hates the people. Vulgar pigs, he calls them, but in the old language. And now I see wheels on metal legs. The wheels squeak as it rolls. Some table on wheels? My one eye can only see in front, not up. The puppy makes whippers and the wheels squeak and my father says, shit. I never hear him say before, Jackie. And big something falls on the floor. And that's when I see the eye. The eye looks back at my eye under the door. It is blue, eyelashes like 50 spider legs. It is stretched open, wide as a screaming eye, Jackie. The eye screams because the mouth, it can't. There is tape.
Luke zippered his mouth shut with a finger.
I hear father, woof, woof, and the eye is gone. Thump.
Luke clapped his hands.
The eye is back on the table.
What the hell? Dude, what is this about? Luke reached into my t-shirt pocket and pulled out another cigarette, lit it, and took a deep drag. He leaned his head back and exhaled.
Like this story, my dude?
I think you read too many fucking comic books. His father wasn't some psycho killer, though he was clearly an asshole. Let's go. My mom's gonna be pissed if I miss dinner again. Except for the glow of Luke's cigarette, the house was dark. It must be after 6. I peered out the window. The rain's letting up, but it's probably gonna start again. I turned back around, but I didn't see Luke, or since it had gotten so dark, I didn't see the glow of the cigarette. Where'd you go?
Sometimes, dude.
Luke's voice was muffled, as if he was speaking through a pillow. Where are you?
Sometimes I don't think it's father crawling down that loquat tree.
There was a puff of cold air in my ear.
Sometimes.
What the fuck? I batted the air beside my ear, but there was nothing there. A crackly, static electric feeling swelled up my spine.
Sometimes I think it's really me.
Okay, now you've really creeped me out. I'm gone. It had gone darker still inside the house. The atmosphere was oppressive. A black glue. I wanted to leave, but somehow I couldn't get off the couch. I could almost taste the dark in my mouth. Foul. Cold.
Are you going to leave me here? All alone?
Come on, Luca. I'm serious.
I can't see, Jackie. I'm lost.
I patted the surface of the couch and found a magazine. I tried to light it. It was too damp. But I managed to light another one. I could just make out the doorway to the kitchen. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw Luke darting into it. Not funny, dude. I managed to get off the couch and was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. There was an inch of water on the floor, and unless Luke was hiding in one of the collapsed cabinets, there was nowhere else he could be. The torch burned my fingers, and I dropped it. The red embers hit the floor. I patted my way back to the living room, looking for the front door, because it was just hitting me. That wasn't Luke darting into the kitchen. The damp darkness felt heavy, sticky as a web. Not a pudgy kid with a bad haircut. And it wasn't my friend I heard breathing next to me in the dark. So, boo!
What? I was staring at the person across the table, feeling as if I'd been shaken from a thick dream.
What'd you think? I scare you?
I didn't recognize the face that seemed to be floating, bodiless, in the feeble glow of the candle between us on the table. What was that slapping sound? Groggily, I touched my cheek as I turned to the window. The leaves of the loquat tree smacked the window pane, and the wind was hunting for an opening as it whistled around the building. Jack pulled out a cigarette and lit it with the candle. "You smoke?" Jack leaned his head back and exhaled.
But that isn't the ending.
Ending?
Of my story.
Oddly, I'd forgotten it was just a story. It was as if I'd been in that dark, drowning house. I could smell the stink of mold, feel the damp sag of the disintegrating couch. Across the table, Jack smiled, eyes sparkling in the candlelight.
You want to hear the ending, don't you?
I wiggled uncomfortably in my chair. Okay. I felt a heaviness, as if my shoes had been filled with sand. If it's not too long.
You want to leave?
I mean, it's late. I have to work in the morning. Jack took a deep drag of his cigarette.
Well, I'll speed it up for you. Luca, remember, he's somewhere in the house, but not answering me. So I yelled something like, "If your dad hits you, that's bogus, dude." I told him he could stay at my house, my mom wouldn't care. The dark felt heavy. I had this feeling I was slowly being dragged deeper into it. The floor beneath me had grown spongy. My sneakers squelched as I looked for the front door. I turned blindly to the sound down the hallway. Something was being dragged. "Not cool, Luca," I called out. I knew the heavy breathing I heard was him, but I had this bizarre thought it was also the house. The dark hallway was a mouth, and it was trying to take me down with the sinking house. "I'm leaving!" I shouted. "Right now!" But I couldn't find the door. Panicked, I patted the wall, then realized I was patting the window. The curtains had been pulled closed, which was why it was pitch black inside the living room. I yanked the curtains and the fabric came away in a rotten cloud. Pale light shone through the dirty window, illuminating veins of mold on the walls. It was as if a street light had turned on. But there'd been no working streetlights in Ocean Vista for years. I yanked the front doorknob, feeling panic rise as the warped door refused to budge. I could hear myself beginning to whimper. I finally managed to pull the door open just wide enough to slip through sideways. I jumped on my bike, and when I glanced over my shoulder, I thought I saw a face in the glow of light beaming inside the house from some unknown source. But it wasn't Lucas. I put my head down and pedaled even faster. By the time I got home, I was in tears. How could I have left my friend in that awful sinking house? In the bright light of the cheerful kitchen, I couldn't eat the dinner my mom had kept warm for me. I'd run off like the biggest chicken. When I told my mom I'd left my friend at Ocean Vista Village, she freaked out at first. She'd had no idea I went there. So dangerous, on and on. But I interrupted. I told her about the kid whose father stole stuff from Sears and smacked him around. How this kid didn't even have a TV, and now he was in some creepy house in Ocean Vista. And maybe he'd been kidnapped. I'd seen a face in the window when I left. Of course, my mom immediately called the police. They didn't find Luca. They didn't find anyone in that house. The cops said there was nothing inside, not even a couch. I couldn't have had a problem opening the front door because there wasn't one. The only thing that gave me hope that I hadn't made the whole thing up was the Harley-Davidson sticker on the mailbox. When the police went to Luca's building, the manager said no kids had ever lived in that apartment. In fact, the last tenant was an old man who died 3 months ago.
I pulled the candle closer to me on the table. Then what? Jack smiled. I turned toward the hallway where the floor had just loudly creaked. When I turned back, the chair across from me was empty. Okay, you win. I'm scared. I cupped my hands around the candle for warmth. Out the window, the loquat leaves tapped the glass. When I looked, I thought I saw a fluttering face looking back at me. A rush of air swooshed by me. I turned to the living room, and there was Jack. He was dancing an odd jig in the flickering light of the dying candles. The herky-jerked swirl and swiggling was exaggerated on the wall into gyrating shadows. His face kept shifting, as if trying to fit puzzle pieces into a form. Darkness swathed his upper face like a mask. I couldn't see his eyes, and I had the sensation of tumbling, spinning, dropping somewhere so deep, so dark that there had never been a word for light.
Hey, did you fall?
I opened my eyes. The lights were back on. They were shining in my eyes so bright I was momentarily blinded. I realized I was lying on the hallway floor. Jack was standing across the room in the front doorway. I stood shakily, one hand on the wall. Jack rushed to my side, put an arm around my shoulders.
Are you all right?
You asshole! I wrenched away from him. You actually dragged me here?
Of course not. You must have fainted after I went downstairs. Don't you remember I went downstairs to find the breaker box? Oh, right when I found it, the electricity came back on. I just now opened the front door and you were lying here.
I shoved past him, grabbing my purse off an end table, slammed the door behind me. As I ran down the stairs, I tripped, catching myself with the railing. I looked down, and the action figure, that thing from the cabinet, was laying across the step I'd tripped on. His blacked-out eyes upturned to mine. I slammed out of the building and sloshed to my car, despite the fog. I drove and didn't stop until a tree branch smashed onto my windshield, blinding me. I slammed on the brakes. The leaves had spread across the windshield like a grinning face. Someone behind me was honking as a horrible realization grew. It wasn't Jack, in the candlelight, dancing that frenzied, wriggling jig. How could I have ever thought it was? It was a kid. A boy with a funny haircut, grinning at me.
Welcome to Goat Valley Campgrounds. Looking for a place to escape your busy life and reconnect with nature? Goat Valley Campgrounds features 300 acres of quiet forest and peaceful scenery for you to enjoy. Come meet Kate. She runs the place, like her parents before her. We know you'll enjoy your stay, as long as you behave yourself and follow the rules. Your survival depends on it. The NoSleep podcast presents Goat Valley Campgrounds Season 2 by Bonnie Quinn. Chapter 7.
I find myself thinking about how my uncle died, his hand outstretched for the radio in a desperate attempt to call for help. I think of my great aunt, stabbing the harvesters in the face over and over, and of my own father, who stood there facing down the beast, even though he knew what the outcome would be. None of us go into the dark easily. I think this is a family trait. I've certainly seen people die easily, just roll over and let death take them, because fighting is too hard or they're too scared. I wonder if this is the prey instinct in us, whispering that it's easier to quietly shut down so that there's no pain, no fear when the wolves close in. A quiet resignation when the mind realizes that there's no way out of this, that this is our fate, as monstrous as it may seem. I struggle to understand it, because me, I'll have to be dragged into the grave, clawing and fighting for whatever scrap of hope is left the whole way. My name is Kate, and this is Goat Valley Campgrounds. I knew my relationship with Sheriff Sabota wasn't going to be like it was with the old sheriff the first time he showed up on my campground to collect a dead body. It was our first interaction in our official capacities. I'd been running the campground for a number of years by that point, but he was in his first year as sheriff. I was occupied wrapping the body in trash bags to hide it from the sight of any campers that might blunder by when he arrived. It was thankfully in one piece this time, but whatever had killed him had still managed to leave a mess behind. What looked like an entire body's worth of blood had sprayed outward in an almost perfect circle. I wanted to move the body out of the way and then spray down the entire area until the blood soaked into the earth. Thankfully, there was one of many hose attachments nearby. Sheriff Sabota brought the van to discreetly transport bodies out of the campground. He certainly hadn't wasted any time in taking on the sheriff's less savory tasks. The election had been rushed as the town desperately wanted a new sheriff. It felt like it had just wrapped up. I suppose that's to be expected. The sheriff fills a similar role as my family does, a buffer for the town, so they don't have to confront the monsters themselves.
Whew, they told me when I got this position that I'd be dealing with a lot of death. And here we are.
Wow. Hello to you too. Congratulations on winning the election.
I mean, I only started a job a month ago. I always suspected that the town was only aware of a fraction of the deaths that happen here, but I didn't expect to be proven right so soon.
Sorry to disprove your pet theory, but the town is right. We get more people hospitalized from dehydration and heat stroke than missing body parts. This will probably be the only death we have to deal with all year.
One too many, don't you think?
Hell, Sabota, coming on rather hard, aren't you? Give it a rest. We went to school together, remember?
Yeah, I didn't like you back then either.
Well, this is off to a great start, I can see. Really looking forward to working with you here. Let's get you what you need and get you on your way. The nearest hospital is used to working with us, so that's where the body goes. They'll figure out a plausible cause of death to put on the paperwork. I've already filled out my part here. Details on the victim, here's their emergency contact form, and then this is the campground report of what really happened. That stays with me, but you're welcome to read it over before I file it away.
I want to know what you're going to do about the creature that caused this.
Pardon, what?
What are you going to do about the monster?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I don't even know what caused it. We get people with family lines from all over the world through here, and their monsters follow them. That's even assuming it is something documented.
So it just gets to hole up in the woods until it gets hungry again, and then I get to come out here and collect another body.
Sabota, what am I supposed to do? Maybe you feel real brave with that gun on your hip, but take it from someone that's actually shot these creatures before. Bullets don't do much. If you're lucky, they slow it down long enough to give you a head start.
There's rituals.
Banishing rituals. That means these things come back, or they go prey on the locals around town. Think you'll keep winning elections after someone's spouse or child goes missing? Besides, a lot of these things on the campground don't even show up in folklore. I'm not about to go around experimenting on them.
So your family doesn't even try?
Oh, we sure have tried. Have you ever taken a stroll through the family graveyard? Do the math on the dates on the tombstones. A lot of people died in their 40s or earlier. You should think about why that is. Make sure to stop by my parents' grave. Think hard on that one. I stalked away after that, and Sabota didn't try to continue the discussion. It's hard to argue when someone pulls out dead parents as a trump card, I feel. Everyone in town knew the story. I felt their whispers following me in the months following their deaths. After I returned from college with no intention of ever going back to finish my degree, it felt like the ocean tide, washing against my heels as I walked through the grocery store in town, as I wandered the aisles of the hardware store. And when I reached the breaking point, when I was ready to turn and scream at them that I hurt and hurt and hurt and didn't need them reminding me of what I had lost, the tide would recede and I'd find myself standing alone, surrounded by furtive silence. I was so very alone. I'm not sure what I would have done without Sheriff Russell. He filled in the gaps that my parents hadn't shown me yet on how to manage the campground. He didn't always agree with how the campground was run, but he still supported me. "Let's figure it out, Kate," he'd say. "Let's figure it out." Of course, I hated Sabota. I don't think we could have gotten along even without the man with no shadows interference. I kept looking at my mother's journal. That first date, the day that the man with no shadows set Sabota down this course. My mother knew. Could she have done something to stop this outcome? Did she try? Perhaps she was merely waiting and watching, and then the little girl cut her life short before anything meaningful could be done. If my family was responsible for the designs that the man with no shadow wove for Sheriff Sabota, then it was only right that I would be responsible for Sabota's fate. I'd just finished brewing and drinking my morning cup of nettle tea the lady with extra eyes had given me when Sheriff Russell showed up on my doorstep. He looked especially grim, his mouth drawn into a thin line. "Is, everything okay?"
No. How are you doing? Your arm working?
I'm okay. My arm feels fine now, but I still feel lost and confused.
Well, this isn't the first time I've seen someone have a crisis of confidence, but this is a damn bad time for it. I'm gonna need you to suck it up and do your job. Get out here. There's work to do.
Harsh? I guess it was what I needed to hear, though. He led me out to his car and he popped the trunk open. I'll be honest, I was not expecting who was inside. Are you thinking right now that it was the buyer? That the old sheriff had finally figured out what the game was and thought it was time to make him vanish for good? Yeah, that was kind of what I was hoping for, too. Well, you're just as wrong as I was. Sabota? Inside was the sheriff. His wrists were handcuffed behind his back and his ankles were tied together with rope. His knees were tied as well, but despite this, he continued to struggle, a strangely rhythmic rocking back and forth as his hips shifted and his knees tried to bend. Dried blood crusted his face from a gash directly in the middle of his forehead. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion and fear, and he weakly turned his head towards us, squinting at the sudden sunlight.
Help me.
And for a moment, I was bewildered as to why he would ask me to save him from the old sheriff. I turned to the man beside me, who only stared grimly down at his captive, one hand still on the lid of the trunk. So, are you looking for somewhere to dump a body? Because honestly, we could just drop him in my neighbor's lake and blame it on the Shalikans, seeing as they've been acting weird lately and all. Look, I may be reconsidering my actions, but I trust the old sheriff's judgment. And if he says someone needs to be disposed of, I ain't questioning it for an instant.
Be more like your father, Kate. Come on. Help me get him out.
The old sheriff reached down, grabbing Sabota's arm and hauling him out of the vehicle. I took the other man's arm, and together we dragged him from the car and into my house. Then the old sheriff pulled a sizable pocket knife out and set to sawing through the ropes that bound the sheriff's legs. Surprisingly, the sheriff began to fight back.
No, don't do it. Don't release me.
Russell refused to be dissuaded, and the ropes snapped free, leaving the man on the floor with only his hands handcuffed behind him. And he began to weep. It was a broken sort of crying, deep within the chest, and there were no tears. It was paroxysms of despair, and the hopeless weeping of a man that had nothing in him with which to fight. He stood, his legs jerked mechanically as if they were on strings, and he began to walk in a straight line and didn't stop when he hit the sofa, just continued to go forwards, and slowly, the piece of furniture began to budge. Inch by inch, being resolutely shoved forwards and to the side with each impact of the sheriff's knees. After a minute of this, the old sheriff intervened by taking the man by his shoulders and forcibly turning him to another direction. And off went Sabota, like a mindless toy, and it was only the old sheriff's intervention that kept him from walking straight into the wall of my living room.
I was hoping you'd have an idea of what to do with him.
Do you even know what's wrong?
Well, I was hoping you'd be able to figure that out as well.
Okay, hang on. I think I can at least keep him from running into the wall. I went to the garage. I don't keep pets. After the horse incident, we decided they were just a bad idea to have around. However, at some point I acquired a dog tie-out, a long spiral stake that went into the ground with a swivel on the end with a long wire lead. I don't remember how I got it and why I still have it. Probably left behind by a camper. Let's take him out into the yard. Come on. I put the stake in the ground and the lead around Sabota's elbow. He walked in one direction until he was out of slack, and then, tugged to the side by the off-center pull of the lead, he began to walk in a long circle. My eye itched as he watched him. I raised a hand and paused, stopping myself before I rubbed at the splinter the lady with extra eyes had placed there.
Well, that's a solution. He's going to walk himself to death, though, if he keeps this up. He's been at this for hours, and he's telling me he's exhausted, and I'm afraid he's going to keep going until he simply drops dead.
The man with no shadow did this. He can order people to do things this extreme. I guess he's decided that he's done with him. Or more likely, he was angry that the sheriff revealed his weakness. We stood in grim silence for a moment, watching the sheriff make his slow, torturous lap around my yard.
Someone from town found the sheriff caught on a fence. The landowner saw a figure struggling at the far end of his field. He went out there to investigate and was surprised to find the sheriff just walking, straight ahead directly into the wooden fence. He must have been out there for some time, for there were furrows dug into the soft earth from his feet repeating the same steps over and over and over.
That's when they called you?
Well, the landowner managed to guide him into the barn, and then he called me. When I showed up, the sheriff had managed to walk into the barn wall enough times that he'd split his head open. That's where the injury came from. We found him moaning in pain with blood running down his face, and he still couldn't stop. His legs just kept going.
That's why you tied him up.
It made him easier to transport. Don't think it made things better.
I went out to the sheriff. Russell remained behind to watch. I matched pace with Sabota as he continued walking in his long circle. What did the man with no shadow tell you to do?
Walk. Just keep walking without turning or stopping.
Just walk until my heart gives out or I blundered into something deadly. like the highway.
My heart sank. I freed my neighbor from the man with no shadow's influence by removing some fingers. But nothing was coming to me now. Perhaps it was because I didn't have an artifact of some inhuman creature at hand. Perhaps there was no connection that would offer up the knowledge I needed to save the sheriff. There was just me and my frail human understanding. I'll think of something. He stared hopelessly straight ahead.
Don't bother. I knew something like this could happen when I gave you that gun. Go inside and get it. Speed things along a little. I'm so tired. I just want this to all stop.
It wasn't just the walking he was tired of. I heard the exhaustion in his voice. He was tired of all of it. Of being the sheriff, of the body bags, of the fear, of the knowledge that we're constantly, always being watched from the shadows, of being hunted. Tired of this town. Tired of the dying. I know what that feels like. I went back to the house, but I did not get the pistol. If I gave up on the sheriff now, would it make it easier for me to give up in the future? That was a road that I was terrified to take, to even glance at, lest I see how easy it would be to walk.
Any ideas?
Could take him to the hospital to be sedated.
Well, it could buy us some time. Assuming the drugs even work. They could simply be consumed by whatever foul power was keeping his body moving. Are there any other remedies that you know of? Something that isn't normal medicine?
I know a few things. There's rituals to protect against evil and others to banish some powers. The problem is that they're specific to certain cultures and creatures that come from those cultures, and the man with no shadow is unique to my land.
Well, anything that's common across all cultures?
Fuck, I don't know. I went to school for business, not to study folklore. I guess that was a mistake. Maybe. I think I've seen a lot of stories where another being of power intervenes, though.
Another being of power.
We both turned to look at the woods. Oh, hell. The lady with extra eyes. She said she'd never help me again. But this wasn't for me. This was Sabota. I hate Sabota. It seemed like a reasonable loophole. We had to try. So we took the sheriff into the woods. I walked to his right, and the old sheriff walked to his left. We each held one of his arms to guide him between us, so that he wouldn't keep going straight into a tree. He didn't speak. He was beyond exhaustion, nearly senseless, but unable to do anything about it. Not with the man with no shadow's words coursing through his body. I told the sheriff that we were taking him to see the lady with extra eyes, and that while she wouldn't help me anymore, I hoped that she'd be willing to help him. I'd stay outside. I wasn't certain if I'd be welcome anymore after our bargain, and I didn't want to risk her refusal. The old sheriff would do the asking. We didn't find the lady. We found the dancers. The young woman that has always been the one to speak to me greeted us on the road. She stood in the middle of the path, barefoot, wearing jeans and a garish hot pink bikini top. We had to adjust our path to go around her, and she fell in beside me as we walked.
You're looking for me.
I'm looking for the lady with extra eyes. I'm not really in a mood to deal with you right now.
You're looking for a cure.
Bargains with fairies always have a price.
Did I say I was a fairy?
Oh. I stopped cold. I let go of the sheriff's arm and let him continue on.
Kate? Kate? What are you doing?
It's fine. I'll catch up in a minute. I stared at the woman in front of me with her round face and her black hair and that faint smile on her lips. You dance. There's some beliefs that a group dancing in a circle around will remove the curse.
Give him to us. You will not get him back. He will join our company and live as long as he chooses to.
He's not gonna like this.
It's not his choice to make anymore, is it? It's yours.
I ran to the sheriff, took him by the elbow, and turned him around. Russell didn't question what I was doing. I've got a solution. You'll go with the dancers. They'll make you one of his, and that'll save you. They can break the man with no shadow's hold. You'll be free.
What? No, Kate. I don't want this. This isn't a solution. Kate, stop it, Kate.
He couldn't fight back. His body no longer under his control. Just as he'd been unable to even raise his arms to stop himself from slamming his head into the wall over and over until he bled, All he could do was beg, as his legs carried him inevitably forwards towards the waiting dancer. She watched with bright, eager eyes.
They kill people. I can't do that. I'm not like you.
My chest felt tight at hearing his cries of protest, but I kept going.
I'd rather die. I'd rather die as a human than be one of those monsters that are trapped here on this damned campground.
I have to save you.
I hate you. You and your whole damn family. You're evil. All of you. You don't have the right to make this choice for me.
But he couldn't stop me. The man with no shadow had told him to walk, and so he did. Straight towards the dancer that stretched out her arms to take him from me. I delivered him into her waiting hands.
Shush, shush. It's okay. You fought so hard and for so long. But your fight is done now. There are others who will see this through now.
And she glanced backwards at where I stood with the old sheriff on the road. Then she left, and she took Sheriff Sabota with her. Did I do the right thing?
I don't know. I guess we'll find out in time.
He left after that. Left me to sort out my thoughts. I admit there wasn't much of that. I sat on my bed, staring at the piece of thread on my nightstand as the minutes and hours ticked by. I didn't feel much of anything. It was like after my parents died. I felt numb. Numb and hollow, and very much alone. I didn't see Russell until a few days later, when he came by to give me an update on what was happening in town.
Well, I lied to them. I didn't like doing it, but with everything that's going on, I think it's best to limit the information they get. I told them the dancers got to him while he was trying to find you out in the woods. Nothing about your part in it. Well, I lied to them.
Will you ever tell them the truth? After we're done with the man with no shadow?
I don't know. Everyone knows you had bad blood, and even without something inhuman whispering in their ears, they might take it badly.
At least he doesn't have a family to notify.
You ever think about why that is?
I assumed it was his personality.
You never saw the good parts of him. I think, after the man with no shadow got to him, I think he gave up hope of something like that for himself. He didn't know what path was being laid out for him, but he must have known it wouldn't end well. I think that's where all that anger towards you came from. This campground was the reason he couldn't have a life he wanted.
I'm angry too. What's that say about my path? Russell didn't reply, just patted me awkwardly on the shoulder and took his leave. Last night at sundown, Brian was making the final rounds through the campground to make sure all our protections were in place. My staff are checking to make sure our extra precautions for the bad year haven't been disturbed every evening. Everything was fine, but he did see a group of people in the woods and stopped at the edge of the road to see if they were trespassers or something else. The dancers. They were setting up wood for the bonfire. The sheriff was there, stuffing dead leaves and small branches at the base in preparation for lighting it. One of the dancers touched his shoulder and he looked up to where my staff sat on their four-wheeler, and he waved. Then he went back to work. The dancer said he would live for as long as he chose to. So I guess he's okay with this for now. I kept telling myself that maybe this is a good thing. He never wanted to be sheriff. I don't know what the sheriff actually wanted, but it wasn't that. Certainly not that. The man with no shadow dictated his future for him, took hold of his life and discarded whatever hopes and dreams he'd once harbored. And then I took him by the arm and delivered him to another fate that he hadn't chosen. I hope he's content with them. I hope he someday stops hating me. I hope he never has to kill anyone.
There are few things as depressing and shitty as working in a seaside British pub. Sticky floors, sticky tables, and sticky-fingered patrons who are reluctant to part with their money. Here in the UK, we don't work for tips, which is a pain when you're dealing with sour-faced misers who don't give a rat's ass about your student debt and the cost of living. Decor is strictly traditional. Football flags and football jerseys spatter the walls like some drunk patrons piss sports all over the place. Everything is brown, whether it's the wooden floor, the wooden bar, the brown leather stools or the faded to brown booth seats that were once maroon. Even the drinks are brown. Bourbon, beer, Guinness, whiskey, rum, and the ubiquitous mixer, Coke. The only thing that sets this bar apart from all the other shitty seaside British pubs is the clientele, which, to be honest, is the only reason why I still work here after 10 months of threats, harassment, assault and minimum wage. I can feel your mind ticking over thinking, what could possibly be so interesting and engaging about the patrons that they could keep her working in a hole like this? To answer that question, let me tell you a little about the people who frequent this place. The losers, the outcasts, and the freaks of the supernatural world. Mona looks haggard today, sucking on a Pall Mall and nursing a pint of stout. Her nicotine-yellow perm is showing grey at the roots, and the wattles under her chin quiver with each suck of the cigarette. One of the 2 flat screens in the bar is playing the music channel, and Mona curls her thin lip-gloss sticky lips at the image of some UK pop star gyrating her nearly naked hips to a thumping bass line. As her lips part in contempt, crooked yellow teeth flash, blackened with meth rot. Her strappy heels and off-the-shoulder dress were designed for someone 20 years younger, and someone with padding in places she doesn't have. Her knobbly spine rises starkly from the skin of her exposed back, giving her the appearance of some haggard meth-addicted stegosaurus. And the hemline of the ensemble is just above her crotch, so when she sits at one of the cigarette-scarred tables near the window, anyone in the booths can see straight into the dingy cavern beneath her slack, wrinkly thighs. She gives a brown speckled smile as I breeze by her table and replace the ashtray for her. I'm pretty sure she likes me, even though I'm the antithesis of her. Young, plump and brown-haired. Typical northerner stock.
Now any boys looking for a good time?
You could always try Dano. I gestured with my free hand to one of our regular malingerers who sits hunched over a Guinness at the bar. But Mona knows better than to mess with the likes of him. Then it happens. A fistful of drunk students crash in through the swinging doors of the bar, which, despite being a dive, is on the route of a fairly famous uni pub crawl. This is Mona's bread and butter right here. Her roomy eyes narrow as she picks out one of the lads, the youngest, most awkward looking of the lot. Like an old, well-oiled engine, she rattles into life and engages in her well-practiced pity story, telling him of her hardship on the streets and her terrible childhood. The kid is like a hare in the headlights, wanting to bolt but held in place by the adept handling of the predator before him. She isolates him from his friends, then bends her head closer to his. For some reason, the others are ignoring them. None of the young men's mates are ribbing him for chatting up an ancient minging method like Mona. 3 minutes later, she's leading him by the hand to the bogs, having promised him the blowjob of a lifetime. He glances nervously back at the raucous crowd of yobbos I'm currently handing out drinks to, and then he's through the smoke glass doors at the back of the pub, heading for some piss-stale, graffiti-cluttered cubicle, where he will indeed receive the best, and probably only, BJ he's ever had. He emerges as his mates finish their round and prepare to move on to the next leg of the pub crawl, leaving 2 smashed pint glasses for me to clean up and ringing ears from their cacophony of ribald jokes. Dano nods to Mona as she waltzes back to her table. They had a deal, it seems, so no doubt the next lot of random revellers that descend on the pub are his. That's fine by Mona, though. Wiping the corner of her mouth, she parks herself back by the window and taps out another Pall Mall. It's not hard to stare when you see the manifestation of an otherworldly power. But working in this bar, I've developed a knack for turning a blind eye. I know the process, though. As the tacky slurry of semen from the awkward young man slides through her innards and is absorbed into her body, Mona's turkey neck tightens and her lips fill out slowly. Liver spots and nicotine stains fade from her hands, and the roots of the brittle horsey perm turn honey blonde and glossy, matched by the youthful glow that suffuses the pert roundness of her once slack breasts. Filling out the dress in all the right places, she flashes a smile of brilliant white teeth at me, and leaves 20 quid under her glass as she exits the pub, tottering into town on smooth, faintly tanned legs that just 20 minutes ago looked wrinklier than the unironed shirt Dano has been wearing for the past 2 weeks. And so the cycle of Mona begins anew. Her youth regenerated, she'll suck dick and drink the seed of young men until she's gorgeous enough to attach herself to some wealthy old arsehole and bleed him dry for a meth habit. Eventually she'll end up back here, haggard, old and hideous, the cycle complete again. How long she's been doing this, I don't know. It could have begun after the first opium dens opened in London, or even as far back as when humanity first discovered the cocoa leaf. As for the young awkward lad from the bar, his vitality will fade over the next week or so until he can't get out to bed. Wasted, frail and grey, he'll gasp out his last breath on a sagging mattress in his student hostel as his heart flutters to a halt, drained of all the precious life force that once animated him. Perhaps he'll die with a smile on his gaunt face, remembering the best and only blowjob of his life. But even if someone were to connect the dots, the ancient Methor who sucked him dry doesn't exist anymore, subsumed back into the body of a healthy 20-something club-goer. What Mona is exactly, I don't know. Here in the British Isles, a lot of old fairy magic still lingers and slides through the blood of the locals, suffusing them with odd powers and the taint of the fae. All I know is that in a month or two she'll be back, a cigarette between her browning teeth and 20 quid left for me at the end of the night. In a world of penny pinchers and minimum wage woes, a tipper like Mona is a ray of sunshine in the drizzle-clouded financial winter of the student barmaid's life. The tide rack on the beach is strong today. That greasy greenish pong permeating everything with the taint of rotting sea life. And it's on days like this that Stan will visit the bar. A beat-up cab will pull up outside the pub, listing to one side. It's always the same cab and the same driver, as nobody else will take Stan as a fare. The driver, an Arab chap in a pressed white shirt and black slacks, will open the rear street side door and Stan will heave himself out of the vehicle, which is a process that can take a couple of minutes. First his bald, dusky brown head will emerge, shiny with sweat which pours down his impressive jowls and onto the chewing gum spotted footpath below. Everything about Stan quivers, except for the top of his head. From there down his flesh becomes a near molten mess of folds and rolls. His sweaty, swaying moobs press wetly into the fabric of his enormous shirt, and the effusive weight of his ponderous stomach poured into his custom-made jeans where it stretches the denim down to his failing knees. Pinwheel-elbowed arms move to pick up a cane in each fleshy paw. Then Stan painfully shuffles into the bar, each step a wheezing, wobbling victory for this morbidly obese colossus. The bar owner reinforced a chair for Stan years ago, as the booths were too small and the bar stools too difficult for him to climb onto. So at the end of his epic trek from cab to chair, Stan will collapse with a bubbling groan into his seat, then pull a tablecloth-sized hanky out of his pocket and vigorously mop the slick of perspiration from his smooth crown and rippling cheek pads. That's when the smell kicks in. It's not just the rank odour of unwashed folds of skin. Stan has his own particular reek. It reminds me of ship bilge and rotting fish, combined with something briny and ancient, like finding your granddad's tackle box from 50 years past still stinking of cod ghosts and rasset guts. Stan is probably my least favourite customer to deal with, and he's a pervert to boot. Whether Dano and Stan are truly friends, or simply struck up an alliance of convenience, I don't know. Whatever the case, they'll chat animatedly about the local football team and whinge about the weather, while Stan mops himself with his oversized kerchief, and Dano flips a tarnished half-crown across his knuckles. I like to pick my moments to deliver drinks to his table, waiting for Stan to embark upon some wheezing rant about the poor management of the Tigers this season. Then I'll nip in and tuck a pint on his offside before he can rotate his bulk to grab at my arse with those greasy digits of his. Given half a chance, Stan will have his hand halfway down your pants before you can recoil in horror. At some point during the evening, a man will enter the pub. Never the same guy twice in a row, but usually nondescript. He'll buy a drink and sit at the table behind Stan. After drinking a third of whatever it is, the man will leave without a word, his mostly full glass still sitting on a cardboard coaster. Never one to waste booze, Stan will nonchalantly swing one quivering arm around, take the drink and coaster, then press the drink to his maw and suck it down. On the coaster is written a time and address, left for him by the stranger. Declaring to Dano that he's hungry and feels like a fish curry, Stan will call his cabbie friend on his oily phone, and then heave himself to his feet and shuffle outside to wait, the coaster gone from the table and tucked into some crevice on his enormous person. A couple of hours later, Stan will return to the bar, the self-satisfied smugness of a well-fed fat man plastered across his pudding features. While none of this is absolutely sinister in and of itself, and you might think Stan a pitiable creature more deserving of sympathy than fear, my time at the bar has disavowed me of this naive notion. Sometimes after Stan's return from his curry stop, he'll gripe about indigestion and demand that I get him an antacid and a pint of water. Bloated and gassy, he'll proceed to ooze rancid meat sweats and trickle out sneaky farts until his corner of the pub is a gagging miasma of sweat shit stink. Often I'd be too distracted by the stench to do anything more than run in with his tablet and water, then exit as quickly as I can. But on one particular occasion, I saw something that turned my bar-hot blood to ice water. Stan's massive gut rumbled and quivered at the best of times, barely placated with crisps and pork scratchings from the bar. But a movement from under his tent-like shirt ran across the surface of his gut like a pregnant woman's baby turning, and a human handprint pressed starkly and plainly against his stomach wall, then vanished. Now, Stan has his own cubicle in the bogs. Like his chair in the bar, it is reinforced and fitted with mobility assistance handles. Any other toilet would probably shatter under his bulk. It just so happened that on the fateful night that I saw that thing in his stomach, Stan's toilet backed up, and my boss asked me to take a look at it. I could tell from tapping the S-bend that the pipe was block solid, so I did my duty as a Jill of all trades and proceeded to take a wrench to it. 5 minutes later, the pipe was off, and a slurry of greasy shit studded with human teeth spilled across the heel-marked cubicle floor. Stan was eating people. Alive, it seemed. I followed Stan one night, begging off from work with a supposed blinding headache. His cab wasn't hard to follow. Listing from one side from his weight, it couldn't be missed. Eventually it pulled up to a pier on the waterfront, and Stan laboriously peeled himself from the sweat-soaked leather. As the cab driver pulled away, Stan laid down his jewel canes, then wobbled to the edge of the slippery pier and looked into the moonlit waters. At first I thought he'd had a stroke. He simply collapsed sideways and into the water. I expected an almighty splash and an eruption of spray, but the impact never happened, and instead I heard the silky whisper of something large but streamlined entering the swells. I ran then, sliding on the slimy boards of the pier, and made it just in time to see the enormous, slickly black-brown body of a titanic eel slip through the waters and vanish. Then I was alone. Only the full moon, the stinker tide rack, and Stan's abandoned canes to keep me company. That Stan is some kind of were-eel, I have no doubt. Nor do I doubt that whatever his deal is with mysterious strangers in the bar, it has to do with body disposal. I think that out of all the denizens of the pub, Stan is the one I would least like to run afoul of. Many and varied are the traditional folk tales of the British Isles that begin with a strange traveller entering an inn, then tricking the innkeeper and the good folk within by means of sorcery, chicanery, or sleight of hand. In one, it's a prankster's cowhide that, as if by magic, produces endless copper coins when struck with a stick. In another, the innkeeper refuses hospitality to one of the fabled fair folk in disguise, and in doing so calls down a terrible curse upon all under his roof. The tales all hold a common thread, as though woven from the same spindle, the truth spooling through the tapestry of rich and convoluted stories like a dark weft of warning. And that common thread tells us that never do these tales end well for anyone but the strange traveller. So it is with the patron we know as Dano. If Shane McGowan had a shorter, thinner brother with teeth, he would be a spitting image of our Dano. An alcoholic of legendary status, Dano spends more time in the pub than any other patron. His favoured stool at the bar has grooves worn into it that perfectly match the angles of his bony arse, and I swear that there are 2 shallow dimples in the bar itself from where his elbows rest. That Dano is as Irish as a Sligo sunrise was never in any doubt. From his thick accent and proclivity for Guinness to his profane yet gilded tongue, he's a walking stereotype to shame the proudest expat Irishman. If you ask him what he does for a living, he'll burr at you in his thick brogue without providing any real information.
Oh, this and that.
Before embarking on some wild anecdote that will instantly suck those listening into his world of half-truths and outright fabrications. Like his Pogue's famous doppelganger, Dano has a voice to pull crowds, which is precisely what he uses it for on Friday nights. From down the street his lilting Irish verse will slip through the drunken street banter, firing some primal part of the Anglo-Saxon psyche and guiding the feet of paying customers to the bar. He'll call for his newfound fans to wet his whistle with an endless river of Guinness, belting out traditional favourites like Whiskey in the Jar, Molly Malone and Danny Boy, the very song that earned him his nickname. Surrounded by his circle of fans, his mood grows darker and meaner as he gets progressively pissed on his favourite drop, until finally the alcohol reveals the true face of our Dano, a mean drunk with a sadistic streak as wide as St George's Channel. The warning sign is when the coin comes out, a battered and tarnished silver half-crown that's as older as I am by 30 years or more. Dano's lips will quirk into a smile that his acquaintances know means trouble, and the coin will begin to dance up and down his knuckles as his capricious nature asserts itself.
I betcha. You can't balance a point between these 2 other points.
Streetwise students and Google smart patrons will take him up on his offer and show the old drunk fool that his time at shystering is long past. Dano will gripe when he loses, and then challenge them to more of the same. Make these 7 coins into 2 lines of 4, drop a matchstick on its side, balance a coin on a 20-quid note. All too happy to take his money, the hapless Mark will grow cocky, figuring they got this old sot figured out. Then the coin dancing along Dano's brawl-sunken knuckles will stop and vanish abruptly.
200 quid, says I can balance the point on an upright toothpick.
Like a man bargaining with the gin of legend, the Mark will make certain to clarify the rules, to ensure Dano can't swindle them out of easy money. Assuring them that there is no trick, Dano will swear on his mammy's grave, hand on heart, that he's being truthful. Unable to resist, the sap will take the bait. But the thing is, this is the one time that Dano is telling the truth. Standing the toothpick upright on the bar, he makes a great show of putting the pint glass on top and feeling around for the sweet spot. There is laughter and shouting from the audience and a look of smug satisfaction from the mark. Then his hands snap away from the vessel and the onlookers fall silent. Atop a single splinter of wood balances a full pint glass. There is outrage from the hustled victim, who demands to inspect both glass and toothpick. Dano sits back, the silver half-crown back in his hand again, as the poor soul checks for some contrivance to make the impossible possible. But there is no superglue, no hole in the bar, no hole in the bottom of the pint glass. Dano's green eyes flash with anticipation, and he sizes up the crestfallen know-it-all who just lost 200 quid.
I'll tell you what. If you don't have the 200 quid, I'll just have your autograph.
With that, he'll slide a napkin and pen on the sap, who gladly signs the square of paper and thanks his lucky stars he didn't have to part with that much cash. Slapping the relieved idiot on the back, Dano will buy the man a drink, then proceed to treat him like family for the rest of the night. And when Lou finally closes up the bar, they'll leave together, arm in arm, singing Irish ditties and staggering off into the dark. And the man will never be seen or heard from again. I knew it was dangerous, and I knew it was stupid. But after working in this place amongst these monsters, fear has become a familiar friend. Following Dano was harder than I thought. The sea fog rolling in off the streets and making it hard to distinguish shapes along the poorly lit pavement. The buildings became unfamiliar, and the fog tinted faintly green, but I had to find out what Dano was doing with these men. Both vanished into an alley, and I hurried to catch up. A strong hand caught my arm and twisted it up behind me, and a sour-smelling palm slapped over my mouth.
Watch.
The alley stretched out before me, impossibly long, with emerald fog enveloping the buildings on either side. The man from the bar staggered along the paving stones, his face now a confused rictus of fear as he backed away from us, staring fixedly behind. I tried to twist my head to see what he was seeing, but Dano's calloused hands held me firm.
Don't look, lass. Don't ever look.
No longer just backing away now, the man in the alley scrambled, fell and picked himself up. Then he ran. He ran as though pursued by the hounds of hell themselves, as a cacophony of baying beasts and shrieking eldritch voices exploded behind me, and an ancient livid fear tore at every fibre of my being. As the maelstrom of hellish sound passed overhead, Dano turned me sharply and threw me into the wall of the alley, facing away from the deafening din. The screams of the man echoed down the alley, pleading, begging and warbling with fear. Abruptly it all stopped, leaving Dano and I alone in a stinking seaside alley, empty and slick with damp. Releasing me, he spat on the flagstones and fixed me with his frigid stare.
Lass, if you follow me ever again, it'll be your soul that I offer up as hell's tithe to the wild hunt.
That Dano could have just left me there to suffer the same fate played on my mind for days. I know now that not all the tales about travelling strangers and unlucky indwellers were based on fiction, and I wonder how many are known first-hand to be the fair creature we call Dano. I think that if it weren't for the stalwart and silent presence of the bar owner Lou, that we would all have suffered some darkly unpleasant fate by now. Anyone who has worked in a stint in hospitality or in a customer service role will be able to tell you dozens of less than amusing anecdotes about problem customers. These folks try our patience with their demanding insouciant disregard for our workload, and seem to believe that they have the God-given right to gnash their teeth and cry, "I want to speak to your manager," at every other breath. Considering my manager, Lou, is as mute as Adrian's wall is long, this is something of a moot issue. But dealing with these people isn't any less stressful because of that. Many of you will know the type I'm talking about. The bob-cut 30-something supervisor with dangly earrings and cat eyeliner who pushes to the front of the drinks queue and glares murderously if you take longer than 30 seconds to serve her, all while you juggle 8 pints, 10 shots and a plate of thermonuclear chips fresh from the fryer. Thankfully, Janet is not one of those people. In fact, Janet and I have a lot in common. Hiking is not something I'd ever thought I'd learn much about, and certainly not from an office-dwelling computer support specialist. From the Black Stairs to Ben Nevis, Janet has done them all. An avid wilderness adventurer. She even hikes through the darkest depths of winter, finding every lonely tor and track between here and Aberdeen. She tells me it's an exercise in stress release, and truth be told, she fucking hates nature. City-born and apartment-raised, Janice blows up in cherry-red hives at the touch of grass seeds and explodes into a building crescendo of sneezes from the slightest waft of pollen. But she says she needs the hiking to stay sane. Being employed in an ordinary 8-to-5 job makes Janet something of an anomaly among the bar patrons, which also means she's a favourite with Lou, since she always pays up front and never keeps a tab. Tidy, fit and practically dressed, Janet is a wiry, wind-tanned ball of restless energy with white blonde hair, ice blue eyes and a pair of silver rings on each thumb, which in some circles apparently denotes her status as a lover of the fairer sex. I discovered her sexual proclivities on my first night working the bar, while Dano and Mona looked on with poker-dry expressions. Caught off guard by the pleasant manner of this sun-browned, well-dressed woman in her 40s, and relieved that not all my customers were dour coastal weirdos, I mistook her flirting for friendship. When her arm slipped around my waist at the end of my shift and she offered to buy me a drink, I nearly shat. But despite that rocky start and the embarrassment of declaring my steadfast heterosexuality, we ended up becoming friends, and found in one another an outlet for our respective frustrations at work by regularly bitching over a pint or two about our customers. While my frustrations run to impatient arseholes and grabby drunks, Janet's line of work involves aggrieved middle managers who've lost precious Excel documents that they need for a meeting that started 5 minutes ago. That her work is rage-inducing is an understatement. Abrupt dismissals, rudeness and sexism plague her day.
If another fucking bloke in a suit asks me if he can speak to a man instead of me, I'm going to defrag his fucking face with a 60-kilo UPS.
As I understand it, Janet's temper has cost her more than one job in the past, and she's just barely clinging to this one by the skin of her teeth. Her reputation as an acid-tongued curmudgeon forced her out of London, hence why she works in this shithole of a town for far less than her skill set is worth. My first hint that something was up with Janet was her refusal to take me hiking.
Sorry, sweetheart. I'm into you and all, but I've been working a shitload of extra hours and I need my alone time.
From behind us at the bar, Dano muttered a thinly veiled jibe about lesbian camping activities and how much he'd pay to see us in a tent together.
The fuck did you just say?
The venom in her voice was practically palpable, arcing across the pub and cutting through the low-key pub chatter and the drone of the 2 TVs. Before Dano could shoot back a smart-ass rejoinder, the pint in his hand whined in resonance and shattered in a shower of Guinness and glass, leaving him with a fistful of splinters and a face full of shock. Wild-eyed and equally shocked, Janet threw 20 quid at the bar and hurried off into the night. On my walk home, I noticed every street lamp for 100 metres down from the pub had blown, only the display lighting from a few of the shops cutting through the brackish seaside gloom. A preternatural chill crept through my thick coat, and I made record time back to the warmth of my flat. When Janet returned, she put 50 quid on Dano's tab and mumbled an apology. All seemed well from there. Janet was even on the up at her work, getting a small promotion and more responsibility over a team. Initially, she smiled more and seemed in much better humour. That deteriorated remarkably quickly.
It's these fucking hours they're making me work.
She spun her drink in a puddle of condensation.
And being on fucking call as well. I can't get outside enough.
You could see it in her stance. She was on edge and agitated constantly. At the slightest provocation, she would snap at people, and her thighs jittered with the nervous energy that was pent up inside her. Or at least I thought it was nervous energy. We were having our usual bitch session near the back of the pub when a group of 3 young men began to pay us a little too much interest.
Evening, ladies.
Kiss off, we're having girl time.
The lad sniffed and gestured obscenely to his mates.
That time of the month.
Ugly lines bulged along Janet's jaw.
Best you and your gobshite giggledick friends trot right the fuck along now.
Her shoulders heaving as she sucked in huge, rage-fueled breaths.
Or what? You gonna go us, Grandma?
As he spoke, the table under Janet's flat hands began to smoulder gently. I'm still not sure how Lou managed to move so fast, but his enormous arm was around my middle before I knew what was happening. Then he threw me past the trio of idiots and behind the bar, where all 198 centimetres of his brawny, gym-built body slammed me to the ground. The sound that permeated the pub as we hit the deck still raises my hackles just thinking about it. First, it started like a distant moan, like the bitter midwinter northerly howling down from the ice-armoured hills. Then, as it grew nearer, a discordant harmony like the shrieking of 1,000 predatory prehistoric avians rose to jar it into a terrible demonic crescendo. Above us, every glass vessel behind the bar burst into 1 billion fragments, showering us with razored flinders and potent alcohols. Lou clapped his massive hand over my ears as the cacophony intensified into a spear of pain that shot through my skull, the bones in my arms and legs vibrating in agonising harmonics. Then it was over. Lou rolled off of me, brushing glass and spirits off his cut-riddled shirt. I pulled myself to my feet, unheeding of the splinters all over the bar as I levered my shaking legs to standing. Dano was crouched behind the reinforced chair that belonged to Stan. Mona sat near the shattered bar window, smoking a fresh cigarette with a complete lack of concern. Janet's booth was a wreck of red. The woman herself stood, bathed from head to toe in the blood of the 3 young men, of whom there was no trace, only a crimson radius that reached to the high roof of the pub, where gobbets of blood and fragments of bone dripped rhythmically onto the slurry of human remains on the floor. Lou appeared beside me with a mop and bucket, then nodded to the mess of glass and liquid behind the bar. As I cleaned, still in utter shock at what I'd just witnessed, Lou pulled out his sturdy old Nokia and rapidly fired a text message off before he joined me in cleaning up. 15 minutes later, a battered old cab pulled up outside and the wheezing, heaving rolls of Stan's body poured out of the vehicle, then into the bar. I'll leave his part of the clean-up to your imagination. I understand now why Janet goes hiking alone. Out on the starlit moors, far away from civilization, I picture her standing naked under the arch of the sky, the grass smouldering under her bare feet, then screaming her supernatural rage into the infinite heavens where it can't do any damage to any living thing. When she came back to the pub, she told me she'd turned down her promotion.
Too much stress. It's not good for your health.
The tale of how I became employed at Lou's Bar is an interesting one. Like many a poor student, I scoured job sites, newspapers and bulletin boards for a part-time gig to help pay my rent and uni fees. Of course, there's fierce competition at the start of the year, and the jobs rapidly dwindle, leaving the painfully young and the patently luckless, like myself, struggling to get by. Down to my last 10 quid for the week, I'd raided the local Tesco for a trolley full of pot noodles, and on my way out I reflexively checked the notice board behind the checkout. Pinned to the corkboard was a printout in jaunty Comic Sans reading, "Bar staff needed. Should have a can-do attitude and great customer wrangling skills. Text me with your details and I'll arrange for a trial." Below the message rested a series of carefully scissored tear-off phone numbers, 3 of them remaining. With nothing else on offer, I thought I'd give it a whirl. Negotiating a job offer via text messaging was an experience I'd never had before, and it put me strangely off guard, as I couldn't present my bubbly, gregarious personality to sway the mystery bar manager into employing me. Even more curiously, he probed into where I was from originally, and pointedly asked if my family lineage contained any non-UK blood. Desperate for employment, I was at least able to reply honestly to the racist pub owner that I was as purebred Anglo as they get, for 10 generations or more, and fair-skinned enough to burn on a sunny winter's afternoon. Half an hour later, I was sent the address of the bar and told to head over where I should introduce myself to the big blonde guy behind the bar. The place was clearly a dive from the outside, though someone had made an effort to throw some fresh paint on the exterior, and the glass in the windows looked brand new. A haggard, mutton-dressed-as lamb thing with a weathered blonde perm sat in the window, fagging up despite the UK-wide smoking ban in pubs. I was already starting to get a feel for the place. Inside was as I've described in my previous tales, a sepia-hued, sports-sticky loser trap designed to suck money out of those who could ill afford to part with it. 2 bulbs were out in the fly-speckled ceiling, and on the bar stood an absolute colossus of a human being, using hands as broad as footballs to replace the blown lights. Blue tattoos wound around his forearms and disappeared into the short sleeves of a white polo shirt, which barely contained the barrel chest and thick neck of someone who lives most of his life outside of work in the gym. Standing nervously at the bar, I watched him climb down, dust off his hands, and turn a radiant, white, smooth smile towards me that caused an involuntary flutter in my stomach. An unkempt Irishman nursing a Guinness growled at me.
"That's Lou, the manager. He doesn't say much."
Ushering me behind the bar, the giant mute began to show me around the place and explain, largely through hand gestures and the odd scribbled note, my new responsibilities. So that's the story of how I got the job at the pub. After my first week, Lou offered me a part-time job, an envelope, and a page of instructions about the running of the pub. Most of it was general business, how to lock up and set the alarm if I was the last one out and the like. But at the end of it all was a curious passage that read as follows. "Should anything terrible ever happen to me, open the envelope, which you should keep safe and not show to a single soul." Grateful just to have a job that at least paid minimum wage, I took the envelope into the back of one of my textbooks and promptly forgot all about it. The idea that anything could happen to Lou seemed faintly preposterous, though as I got to know the peculiarities and personalities of the pub patrons, I began to realise that I actually knew precious little about the proprietor. Hell, I didn't even know his last name. And why he had absolutely no fear of the motley of fair weirdos that graced his establishment, I also had no clue. He seemed as mortal as me, plainly able to bleed and therefore able to die. But that didn't mean he accepted everyone into his pub, as I later found out. Knobbly shoulders, an oily ponytail, and a sparse goatee marked Dave as exactly the kind of loser who should belong in the dingy seaside pub. But even amongst dyed-in-the-wool miscreants and malcontents, there was something off about him. He claimed some distant noble heritage, that he was descended from the ancient side kings of the north, that his apparent birthright gave him no unique gifts was a sore point, and he would often mutter dourly to himself when the others ribbed him about his claims to an eldritch lineage. Hence he earned the unkind moniker, the Duke. One fateful night he apparently had enough of it all and started smashing up the place. After Lou tossed him out on his arse, battered and bruised, the Duke had vowed he would come back and kill every last one of us, Lou especially. We didn't see him again for many months, but when he returned, it was clear that something had changed. Whether he'd made a bargain with some unseelie spirit, or he had made a pact with hell itself, he clearly had power now. "Sorry, love, but you're going to have to leave." His leather trench coat creaked as he ignored me and planted himself on one of the bar stools. Cocking my head, I pitched my voice to cut through the buzz of the ambient pub noise. "Lou, got a visitor for you." As my boss pushed through the door from the kitchen, the temperature in the bar dropped abruptly, the dishwater in the sink icing over in an instant. Pale blue light flared in the Duke's eyes as he raised his hands and chanted a string of alien vowels. Lou moved like a dancer, sliding past me and straight under the bar where the Duke sat with crackling sapphire flame ringing in his fists. But before the newly fledged sorcerer could utter the final syllables of his spell, there was a great crack, and 2 feet of silver-bladed claymore pierced the bar, impaling him through the gut. Sagging forward onto the blade, the man coughed a great gout of crimson onto the sticky wood under his hands, and as he did so, the arcane energies around his fists flared at the contact with fluid, licking along the wood and engulfing the blade. With an arterial howl of surprise and triumph, the Duke grasped the sword in both hands and dribbled out the last words of his curse. A searing flash of blue flame engulfed the blonde giant behind the bar. And then Lou was gone, only a heap of smouldering black ash marking his demise. Still grinning bloodily on the end of the warped and blackened blade, the sorcerer snapped the ruined sword, then lurched out of the bar, leaving spatterings of red in his wake. All we could do was stare in abject shock. The instructions in the envelope were clear and concise, leaving little room to be misinterpreted. But why Lou had chosen this particular godforsaken stretch of desolate coastline for his last rites was not at all clear. The cave was exactly where he described it in the letter, and inside was the dented and patched cauldron that he said would be there. Filling it with seawater took several trips, but once it was full, I lit a driftwood fire under it and waited for the sun to set. As it finally slipped below the horizon, I fished the lock of blonde hair from the bottom of the envelope and cast it into the slowly boiling seawater. "Keep the fire burning till sunrise," the letter had said. "But whatever happens, do not look into the cauldron, not under any circumstances." Nonplussed, I wondered what could possibly happen if I did. I settled back on my coat and backpack and let the tears come as I watched the flames flicker under the oven-sized soot-streaked vessel. Lou was the sole reason I was still able to afford my flattened tuition, and he and his motley of loser supernaturals had become like a surrogate family. Lulled by the warmth and crackle of the fire, I finally slipped into an exhausted sleep. I awoke with a preternatural sense of dread. The fire had burned low, and I could see nothing beyond a dim circle of radiance. Heaping more of the stacked driftwood onto the coals, the cave slowly brightened, and my stomach lurched with vertigo. Around me, the cave walls were lost in hundreds of meters into the darkness, the ceiling far beyond the reach of the light. Emerald sparks danced on the bubbling seawater surface of the cauldron, and tendrils of steam rose from it, curling into sinister shapes. Of the cave entrance there was no sign, and in fact, the apart from the circle of stone that I and the cauldron sat upon, there appeared to be no other ground at all. More terribly, something stirred in the abyss surrounding my island of rock. Something that moved slowly and languidly with a maddening celestial grace that fired a primeval terror in the core of my being. I did not belong here. The cauldron groaned, as though it bore a great burden of weight, and something splashed in the verdant depths. Chilled despite the warmth of the fire, I found myself caught between the horror of the something that turned ponderously and hugely in the darkness below, and the unknown thing inside the cauldron. How long I huddled in the no man's land between the glimmering, murmuring cauldron and the precipice, I don't know. My phone was little more than a paperweight, refusing to even turn on in this otherworldly limbo. Voices began to slither out of the void beyond the firelight. Monstrous at first, then becoming familiar as family, their distorted echoes pleading me to look inside the cauldron and insisting that if I did not, this night would never end. Stuffing the sleeves of my coat over my ears, I screamed at the voices to desist. The pillar of rock that supported the cauldron trembled at my voice, as though my cry had disturbed the unknown behemoth below. Fairy fire danced on the water now, blazing, moiling, and leaping in the confluence of baleful radiance. The fire beckoned me, and the cauldron murmured soothingly again, as though calling for me to approach. Closing my eyes, I willed myself to think of anything but the cauldron, to think of kittens and sunny nooks, bumblebee-filled meadows and the smell of old books. Green flared against my eyelids, and I felt the pillar of rock tremble again, both entities seeming angered by my refusal. Gritting my teeth, I focused my will into a singular point and found a well of calm in the centre of my being. Some old piece of my ancestry that could not be touched by these forces. And then, abruptly, it was over. Sunrise lanced through the entrance of the cave and shone on the battered old cauldron now empty of even seawater. Of the dread precipice and the dire fairy fire there was no sign. Only the normal rock of the sea-damp cave remained. I had done my duty. I had completed Lou's last rites. As I entered the pub, the soul-rending strains of Danny Boy stirred my weary heart, and fresh tears slicked my sea-salty face. Inside, the others had gathered to pay tribute to the fallen hero. Danny's voice lending an eternal atmosphere to the place, the sticky wooden floor and dusty football banners fading into the background as the tune rose to claim the focus of the pub. As the final note trailed off, Mona sniffed and blew her nose into a napkin. Dano grimly picked up his Guinness, and Janet patted me on the back as she busily wiped under her eyes with her free hand. Slow, sardonic clapping came from behind me, and I turned, confused, to view the twisted smirk of the Duke, standing in the door of the pub. Get out. Tutting me gently, he stalked forward.
That won't do.
Then there was a blur of motion, and the Duke no longer stood in front of me. Instead, he now hung from the thick wooden doorpost, a bronze-shod spear pinioning him through the heart. And behind the bar stood Lou, grinning from ear to ear. With a final gurgle of confused dismay, the Duke stared at the apparition before him, then died. What happened in that cave lies unspoken between Lou and I. A closely guarded secret, and security against those who might seek his death in future. A precious lock of his hair lies tucked away in a hidden place, should the need to use the cauldron of rebirth ever arise again. And as for me, the trial in the cave left its mark on my soul. I see things now, things no mortal should be capable of seeing. But that's a tale for another time. Better get off the computer. My employer is taking me out to dinner.